There are moments in life when pride becomes a poison so slow, so sweet, that you don't realize it's killing you until you've already destroyed everything worth keeping. Duke Damien Blackthorne learned this truth the night he watched his wife kneel before him in the rain, her silk gown soaked through, her voice breaking as she begged him not to leave. He looked down at her trembling hands clutching his coat, felt nothing but contempt for her weakness, and walked away without a single word. That was the night he became the most powerful man in London. It was also the night he signed his own death warrant. What happens when the woman you broke becomes the only person who can save you, and she chooses not to? Stay until the end, because what Damien lost that night, he would spend the rest of his life trying to understand. But no. The storm that night was biblical. Rain hammered against the windows of Blackthorne Manor like artillery fire, each gust of wind making the old stone walls groan. Inside the grand entrance hall, Lady Vivian Ashford stood waiting, her fingers twisted together so tightly the knuckles had gone white. She had been standing there for 3 hours. The servants pretended not to notice, moving through the corridors with their eyes carefully averted, but she knew they pitied her. Everyone pitied her. The clock struck midnight. Vivian flinched at the sound, then hated herself for flinching. She was 26 years old, the Duchess of Blackthorne, mistress of one of the wealthiest estates in England, and she was waiting like a servant for her own husband to come home. The irony wasn't lost on her. Nothing was lost on her anymore. That was the problem with humiliation. It made you painfully aware of every small degradation, every tiny cut that added up to a bleeding wound you couldn't name. The front door crashed open. Damien Blackthorne stepped inside, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, rain streaming from his greatcoat. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered and severe, with the kind of face that looked like it had been carved from granite by an angry god. His eyes were gray, cold as winter steel, and when they landed on Vivian standing in the hallway, they didn't soften. They never softened. Not for her. "You're still awake." His voice was flat, neither surprised nor pleased. He shrugged out of his coat and handed it to the butler who had materialized from the shadows. Water pooled on the marble floor. Vivian took a step forward, her heart hammering so hard she thought he might hear it. "I wanted to speak with you." Damien barely glanced at her as he moved toward the study. "Tomorrow, Vivian. I'm tired." "Please." The word came out smaller than she intended, almost a whisper. "Just a few minutes. That's all I'm asking." He stopped walking but didn't turn around. His shoulders were rigid beneath his wet shirt, every line of his body radiating impatience. "What is it?" It wasn't a question. It was an order to speak quickly and then disappear. Vivian swallowed hard. She had rehearsed this conversation 100 times, practiced the words until they felt smooth in her mouth, but now that the moment was here, everything fell apart. "The rumors," she began, her voice shaking, "about you and Lady Seraphine. People are talking, Damien. The entire ton is—" "Let them talk." He said it so easily, like it cost him nothing. Like the whispers that followed Vivian through every ballroom, every dinner party, every social engagement where she had to smile and pretend her husband's public affair wasn't destroying her piece by piece, like none of it mattered. "You don't understand," she continued, desperation creeping into her voice. "It reflects on both of us, on our family. If you would just what?" Now he did turn, and the look on his face made her stomach drop. "What exactly are you asking me to do, Vivian?" She forced herself to meet his eyes. "I'm asking you to stop seeing her, to remember the vows we made, to try what? To love you." The question hung in the air like a knife. Vivian felt something crack inside her chest. "Is that so impossible?" Damien stared at her for a long moment, and in his silence she saw the truth she had been refusing to accept for 3 years. He didn't hate her. Hatred would have been something, at least, an emotion she could work with, could try to soften or change. But what she saw in his eyes was worse than hatred. It was indifference. "I never lied to you," he said finally. "I told you before we married that this was a political arrangement. Your father needed my title. I needed his money. That was the bargain. You knew what this was." "I thought," Vivian whispered, "that maybe over time—" "You thought wrong." The words landed like blows. Vivian felt her vision blur, felt the hot sting of tears she had promised herself she wouldn't cry. Not in front of him. Not again. "She's using you," Vivian said, her voice breaking. "Seraphine doesn't care about you. She cares about what you can give her. Your influence, your wealth, and you're different." Damien's laugh was cold. "You don't care about those things. I care about you." The confession came out before she could stop it, raw and honest and completely humiliating. She saw something flicker across his face. Not softening, but something close to surprise. As if he genuinely couldn't understand why anyone would care about him for reasons beyond what he could provide. For a second she thought maybe she had reached him. Then his expression hardened again. "Caring isn't enough, Vivian. It never has been." He turned away, heading toward the study, and Vivian felt panic claw up her throat. This was it. This was the moment. If she let him walk away now, she would never get another chance. She had already humiliated herself this far. What was a little more? "Damien, please." She didn't remember moving, but suddenly she was in front of him, blocking his path. Her hands were on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. He looked down at her like she was an obstacle, nothing more. "I'm begging you," she whispered. "Don't go to her tonight. Stay with me. Talk to me. Just try. Please. Move, Vivian. No." Her voice was shaking now, tears streaming down her face. I won't let you destroy us like this. We can fix this. There is no us." He said it so quietly, so matter-of-factly, that at first she didn't understand. Then the meaning sank in, and it felt like drowning. "Get out of my way, Damien, now." She didn't move. Couldn't move. Her whole body felt frozen, locked in this terrible moment where everything she had tried to pretend wasn't true became undeniable. So Damien did what he always did when faced with something he didn't want to deal with. He simply stepped around her. Vivian's legs gave out. She didn't mean to fall, didn't plan it. But suddenly she was on her knees on the cold marble floor, her silk gown pooling around her like a shroud, and she was looking up at her husband's retreating back through a haze of tears. Damien. Her voice was barely a whisper now, all the fight drained out of it. He stopped at the study door. Didn't turn around. "Please don't leave me." Silence. For 5 long seconds, Damien stood perfectly still, his hand on the doorknob. Vivian waited, hope and desperation tangled so tightly in her chest she couldn't breathe. Maybe he would turn around, maybe he would see her there, broken and bleeding and begging, and finally feel something, anything. The door opened. Damien walked through. It closed behind him with a soft click that echoed through the empty hallway like a gunshot. Vivian knelt there on the floor, staring at that closed door, and felt something inside her shatter so completely she knew it would never be whole again. The servants had vanished. Even they couldn't bear to witness this final humiliation. She was alone in the vast, cold hallway of a house that had never been a home, married to a man who would never love her, and for the first time in 3 years, she stopped crying. Not because the pain had stopped, but because she had finally run out of tears to give him. Vivian didn't remember walking back to her chambers, didn't remember her lady's maid helping her out of the soaked gown, didn't remember climbing into the massive 4-poster bed that she had never once shared with her husband. She stared at the canopy above her, at the intricate patterns carved into the wood, and felt absolutely nothing. It was the nothing that frightened her. She had spent 3 years feeling too much, loneliness and shame and desperate, pathetic hope that maybe tomorrow would be different. Maybe tomorrow Damien would look at her and see a wife instead of a burden. But now, lying in the darkness, listening to the storm rage outside, she felt hollow, empty, like something vital had been scooped out of her chest and thrown away. The rain kept falling. Vivian closed her eyes and made a decision. Dawn came gray and cheerless. Vivian rose before the servants, dressed herself in a simple traveling gown, and went to Damien's study. He wasn't there, probably still at Seraphine's townhouse, she thought, and was disturbed by how little the thought hurt now. The pain was still there, but distant, like something happening to someone else. She sat at his desk and pulled out a sheet of heavy parchment. Her hand was steady as she wrote, the words coming easily now that she had finally accepted the truth. I, Lady Vivian Ashford Blackthorne, Do hereby consent to a complete dissolution of my marriage to Duke Damien Blackthorne. I ask for nothing. I take nothing. I relinquish all claims to title, property, and association with the Blackthorne name. This marriage is ended. I am gone." She signed it, folded it, and left it in the center of his desk where he couldn't miss it. Then she walked out of Blackthorne Manor and never looked back. Damien didn't find the letter until late that afternoon. He had come home from Seraphine's in a foul mood, their argument still ringing in his ears. She had asked him to divorce Vivian, to make their relationship official, and he had refused. Not because he cared about his marriage. He didn't, not really. But because divorce was scandalous, expensive, and politically complicated. Seraphine had thrown a vase at him. He had left. Now he stood in his study, holding Vivian's letter, and felt, what exactly? Relief. That was the first emotion. Relief that she had finally stopped her pathetic attempts to win his affection, that he wouldn't have to endure any more tearful confrontations or desperate pleas. The marriage had been a business arrangement. She had known that. Now she had finally accepted it and freed them both. He tossed the letter aside and poured himself a drink. But as the day wore on, something else crept in beneath the relief. Something he couldn't quite name. He found himself walking past Vivian's empty chambers, noticed the way the servants moved through the house with unusual quiet, as if afraid to disturb a ghost. At dinner, he ate alone at a table set for two, and the empty chair across from him felt accusatory somehow. Ridiculous. He had eaten alone for most of their marriage anyway. Vivian's absence changed nothing, except it did. The house felt different, emptier. He told himself it was just the novelty of the situation, that he would adjust in a few days and everything would return to normal. Better than normal, actually, since he no longer had to deal with Vivian's hurt looks and trembling voice and those God's damn tears. A week passed, then two. The whispers started almost immediately. Lady Vivian Ashford had vanished. No one knew where she had gone. Her father, the Earl of Ashford, claimed ignorance when pressed. The servants at Blackthorne Manor said nothing, their loyalty to their former mistress absolute. Damien found himself the subject of intense speculation at every social event. Had he killed her, driven her mad, locked her in an asylum? He ignored it all. Seraphine was delighted, of course. Now they could be together openly, she said. Now he could finally make her Duchess Blackthorne. Damien said nothing, but he noticed the way her eyes gleamed when she talked about the title, about the power and prestige it would bring. Vivian's words came back to him unbidden. She's using you. He pushed the thought away. A month after Vivian's disappearance, Lord Ashford requested a private meeting. Damien expected anger, threats, demands to know what he had done to the man's daughter. Instead, Ashford sat across from him in the study and looked at him with something close to pity. "She asked me to give you this," Ashford said, handing over a sealed envelope. "She made me promise to wait a month before delivering it." Damien took the envelope but didn't open it. "Where is she?" "I don't know." Ashford stood to leave, then paused at the door. "But I do know this, Your Grace. My daughter loved you. Truly, genuinely loved you. That's a rare thing in our world. Most of us marry for money or position or family alliances, and we're lucky if we develop affection over time. But Vivian loved you from the beginning, and you destroyed her for it." "She knew what she was getting into," Damien said coldly. "I never lied about my intentions." "No," Ashford agreed. "You were honest about being cruel. I suppose that's something." He left. Damien sat alone in the study, turning the envelope over in his hands. Part of him wanted to throw it in the fire unread. What could Vivian possibly have to say that would matter now? She was gone. The marriage was over. He was free. He opened the letter. "Damien, by the time you read this, I will have been gone long enough that looking for me would be pointless. I'm not writing to ask you to come after me. We both know you won't. I'm writing because I need you to understand something. I don't hate you. I know I should. I know any reasonable person would say you deserve my hatred, my anger, my desire for revenge. But I can't seem to muster any of those things. Maybe I will eventually. Maybe distance and time will transform whatever I feel for you into something sharp and poisonous. But right now, all I feel is sad. Sad for the marriage we never had. Sad for the man I thought you might become if given the chance. Sad for myself, for wasting 3 years loving someone who saw it as a burden instead of a gift. You were right about one thing. Caring isn't enough. I cared desperately, and it changed nothing. So I'm leaving before caring destroys me completely. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for with Seraphine. I hope she makes you happy, though I suspect happiness isn't what either of you really wants. Power suits you both better. Don't look for me, don't worry about me, just let me go. Vivian Damien read the letter 3 times. Then he did throw it in the fire. Life continued. Damien threw himself into his business affairs with renewed focus. The Blackthorn shipping empire was vast and required constant attention. New routes to negotiate, competitors to crush, profits to maximize. He spent his days in meetings with merchants and financiers, his nights at political dinners and society events with Seraphine on his arm. She was perfect for those occasions. Beautiful, charming, ruthless enough to match him in any verbal sparring. They made a formidable couple, and people were beginning to accept their relationship as inevitable. Damien would divorce the missing Vivian, marry Seraphine, and together they would dominate London society. It was everything he wanted, so why did he keep thinking about that last night? Why did he keep seeing Vivian on her knees, her face streaked with tears, her voice breaking as she begged him not to leave? He had felt nothing in that moment except irritation at her weakness. But now, months later, the image haunted him in odd moments. During business negotiations, while getting dressed in the morning, late at night when he couldn't sleep. He told himself it was just guilt. Natural, understandable guilt for being harsh with a woman who had genuinely cared for him. It would fade with time. It didn't fade. 6 months after Vivian's disappearance, the first cracks began to show in Damien's empire. It started small, a shipment that went missing, a trade deal that fell through at the last second, a business partner who suddenly backed out of a contract, citing vague concerns about financial stability. Nothing catastrophic on its own, but together they formed a pattern. Someone was targeting him. Damien increased security on his ships, investigated his business partners, hired people to look into the failed deals. Every investigation led nowhere. Whoever was orchestrating this was smart, careful, and had resources that rivaled his own. Within a year, the attacks intensified. A fire destroyed one of his warehouses. An investment he had counted on collapsed when the company mysteriously went bankrupt overnight. 3 of his most loyal associates suddenly switched allegiances, joining a rival shipping company that had appeared out of nowhere and was already dominating trade routes Damien had controlled for years. The rival company was called Ashford International. The name meant nothing to him at first. Then he learned that the owner was a woman, a mysterious figure who never appeared at public events, who conducted all her business through intermediaries and legal representatives. No one knew where she had come from or how she had amassed such wealth and influence so quickly. But within 2 years of appearing on the scene, she had become one of the most powerful figures in international trade. Damien tried to arrange a meeting. His requests were politely declined. He tried to buy her out. His offers were ignored. He tried to undermine her business the way someone was undermining his. Every attempt failed spectacularly, often backfiring in ways that cost him more money and reputation. It was infuriating, impossible. No one should have been able to outmaneuver him this thoroughly, especially not some unknown woman who had appeared from nowhere. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Ashford. Vivian's family name. No, it couldn't be. Vivian was gentle, shy, completely unprepared for the brutal world of business and politics. She could barely manage a conversation at a dinner party without blushing. The idea that she could have transformed into a ruthless business magnate in just a few years was absurd. But the name, the timing, the systematic destruction of his empire using methods that seemed almost personally motivated, Damien threw everything he had into investigating Ashford International. He called in favors, bribed officials, hired the best investigators money could buy. And slowly, piece by piece, the truth emerged. The owner's legal name was Vivian Ashford, not Blackthorn. She had reclaimed her maiden name. She had used money from her mother's side of the family, a source of wealth Damien had never bothered to investigate because he had been so focused on her father's political connections. She had started small, investing in shipping routes no one else wanted, building relationships with merchants and traders Damien had considered beneath his notice. And she had been patient. Gods, she had been so patient, While Damien had been focused on Seraphine and his own arrogance, Vivian had been quietly building an empire designed specifically to destroy his. Every business decision she made seemed calculated to undermine something he controlled. Every alliance she formed was with someone he had wronged or dismissed. She wasn't just competing with him, she was dismantling him piece by piece, and she was doing it so skillfully that he hadn't even realized what was happening until it was almost too late. The woman who had knelt before him, begging for his love, had become the greatest threat to everything he had built. Damien sat in his study, surrounded by reports and financial documents, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years: fear. Buatik. 3 years after Vivian's disappearance, the invitation arrived. It was delivered by a royal messenger, sealed with the king's personal crest. Damien opened it with hands that shook slightly. Not from nervousness, he told himself, but from rage at how far he had fallen that his hands would shake over a piece of paper. You are cordially invited to a royal investment summit at Buckingham Palace. His Majesty has expressed particular interest in forming new trade agreements and wishes to meet with the kingdom's most influential business leaders. The summit was in 2 weeks. Damien knew it was his last chance. His fortune was hemorrhaging money. His political allies were abandoning him, and even Seraphine had started making pointed comments about his declining influence. If he could secure a royal contract at this summit, he might be able to save everything. Rebuild. Start over. He had to attend. The night before the summit, Damien stood in his study and looked around at what remained of his legacy. Half the books had been sold. The expensive artwork was gone. The staff had been cut to a skeleton crew. Blackthorn Manor felt like a mausoleum, and he was the last ghost haunting its halls. Tomorrow, he thought. Tomorrow everything changes. He had no idea how right he was. Bashis. Buckingham Palace glittered with wealth and power. Damien arrived early, determined to make connections before the formal proceedings began. The ballroom was already filled with nobles, politicians, and business leaders, all dressed in their finest and wearing practiced smiles that hid ruthless ambition. This was his world. He had dominated rooms like this his entire life. But tonight, something was different. People were staring at him, not with the respect and fear he was used to, but with curiosity, pity. Some looked away quickly when he met their eyes, uncomfortable with whatever they saw in his face. Others whispered to each other behind their hands. Damien's jaw tightened. Let them whisper. After tonight, they would remember why crossing a blackthorn was a mistake. Lord Ashford arrived, looking older than Damien remembered. They hadn't spoken since that meeting years ago when Ashford had delivered Vivian's letter. The Earl saw him across the room and his expression turned cold. Damien turned away. The Royal Herald announced the beginning of the summit, and everyone moved toward the grand hall where the king would address them. Damien positioned himself near the front, ready to seize any opportunity that presented itself. The king spoke about prosperity, trade, the future of England's economy. Damien barely listened, his mind working through strategies and contingencies. Who to approach first? What to offer? How to appear strong when everyone knew he was barely hanging on? Then the king said something that made Damien's blood run cold. We are honored to have with us tonight the owner of Ashford International, whose vision and business acumen have revolutionized trade in our kingdom. Please welcome Lady Vivian Ashford. The room erupted in applause. Damien couldn't move, couldn't breathe. A woman stepped onto the dais beside the king. She wore a gown of deep emerald silk that probably cost more than what remained in Damien's coffers. Her dark hair was arranged in an elaborate style, diamonds glittering at her throat and wrists. She moved with a grace and confidence that belonged to someone who had never doubted her place in the world. But it was her eyes that destroyed him. They were the same blue he remembered, but everything else about them had changed. The warmth was gone, the softness, the desperate hope that had once made him feel suffocated. Now they were cold and clear and completely unreadable. Vivian looked out at the assembled crowd, and her gaze passed over Damien as if he were furniture, as if he were nothing at all. She smiled, a professional, diplomatic smile that reached her mouth but never touched those Arctic eyes, and began to speak about trade routes and investments and opportunities for partnership. Her voice was steady, authoritative, completely devoid of the trembling uncertainty he remembered. This wasn't the woman who had knelt before him. This was someone else entirely, someone he didn't know, someone he couldn't control. The realization settled over Damien like ice water. The woman he had destroyed had rebuilt herself into something far beyond his reach, and she had done it specifically to ensure he would never touch her again. The summit continued. Business leaders presented their proposals. The king asked questions. Deals were negotiated with diplomatic politeness that barely concealed cutthroat competition. And through it all, Vivian stood at the center of everything, the axis around which the entire room seemed to turn. Damien tried to approach her 3 times. The first time she was surrounded by admirers and didn't acknowledge his presence. The second time she excused herself before he could reach her. The third time she looked directly at him. Finally, actually looked at him, and her expression was so perfectly, devastatingly blank that he felt like he'd been struck. "Excuse me," she said politely, as if he were a stranger. "I have other engagements." She walked past him. Damien stood frozen in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by the elite of England, and felt more alone than he ever had in his life. The formal presentations began after midnight. One by one, business leaders stepped forward to present their cases for royal investment. Damien listened to each proposal with growing dread because he could see the pattern. Every single person who spoke had some connection to Vivian. Some were her direct business partners. Others had clearly coordinated their proposals to complement her interests. She had orchestrated the entire summit. When Damien's turn finally came, he stepped onto the dais with his carefully prepared speech about Blackthorn Shipping's history and potential. He spoke about legacy and tradition and the partnerships that had made England a maritime power. He sounded desperate. He knew it. Everyone knew it. When he finished, the applause was polite but perfunctory. The king thanked him for his time and moved on to the next presenter without asking a single question. Damien returned to his seat feeling hollowed out. The final presentation of the night was Vivian's. She stepped onto the dais carrying a leather portfolio, and the room went completely silent. Even the servants stopped moving. Every eye was fixed on her, waiting to see what she would do. She opened the portfolio and pulled out a stack of documents. "Your Majesty, members of the court, esteemed colleagues." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "I want to talk to you tonight about trust, about loyalty, about the cost of betrayal." A murmur ran through the crowd. This wasn't the tone anyone had expected. Damien felt his heart start to hammer. 3 years ago, Vivian continued, her voice calm and clear, I discovered that certain business associates of mine had been systematically undermining my investments, stealing trade routes, bribing officials, using inside information to destroy deals before they could be finalized. She looked directly at Damien. "It took me a long time to find out who was behind it. They covered their tracks well. But eventually, I traced every betrayal back to 3 men, Lord Christopher Harding, Sir William Cross, and Baron Frederick Ashton. Perhaps you know them. They've been fixtures of London society for years, trusted advisors, respected business partners. The 3 men she named had gone pale. They were also, Vivian said, her voice never rising, never showing emotion, the closest allies of Duke Damien Blackthorn." The room erupted. Damien shot to his feet. "This is absurd." "Is it?" Vivian gestured to the servants, who began distributing copies of the documents from her portfolio. "These are financial records, correspondence, signed contracts showing how Lord Harding, Sir Cross, and Baron Ashton sold information about Blackthorn Shipping to my competitors, how they deliberately sabotaged his business deals and pocketed the profits. And when I started investigating, they did the same to me, because they had been playing both sides the entire time." The king was reading through the documents, his expression growing darker by the second. Damien grabbed one of the papers being passed around. The evidence was irrefutable. His closest advisors, men he had trusted for decades, had been destroying him from the inside, and they had been doing it for years. Long before Vivian had ever started her company. The attacks he had blamed on her, the systematic dismantling of his empire, most of it had been his own people. Vivian had just been better at surviving it. "Your Majesty," Vivian said, her voice cutting through the chaos, "I bring this to your attention not out of revenge, but because these men have been manipulating the kingdom's trade for their own gain. They've stolen from Duke Blackthorn. They've stolen from me. And I suspect if we investigate further, we'll find they've stolen from many others in this room." The king stood, and the room went silent again. "Guards," he said quietly. Arrest them. The three men tried to run. They didn't make it to the doors. As they were dragged away, protesting and pleading, Damien stood perfectly still, trying to process what had just happened. Vivian hadn't destroyed him. His own allies had. She had simply been the one to expose it. But why? He looked at her across the ballroom, and she looked back. And for the first time that night, he saw something flicker in those cold blue eyes. Not hatred, not triumph, just a deep, abiding sadness that made his chest ache. The king was calling for order, announcing an investigation, promising justice. People were shouting questions, demanding answers. The summit had descended into chaos. And through it all, Vivian stood on the dais like a queen surveying a battlefield, untouchable and alone. Damien began walking toward her. People moved out of his way, creating a path through the crowd. He climbed the steps to the dais, very aware that every eye in the room was watching. When he reached Vivian, she didn't step back, didn't flinch, just looked at him with those calm, terrible eyes. "Why?" he said. His voice was raw. "Why would you save me?" "I didn't save you," Vivian replied. "I told the truth. What you do with it is your own concern. They betrayed me. They betrayed everyone." She gestured to the chaos in the ballroom. "But you made it easy for them, Damien. You were so busy looking down on everyone around you that you never noticed the knives at your back." The words hit harder than he expected. "You could have let them destroy me completely," Damien said. "You could have taken everything. I already have everything. It wasn't a boast, just a statement of fact." Damien stood there looking at the woman he had once dismissed as weak and pathetic, and finally understood what he had lost. Not just a wife, not just a marriage, but the only person who had ever looked at him and seen something worth loving, and he had thrown it away like garbage. "Vivian?" he began, not sure what he was going to say, but desperate to say something. She held up a hand, stopping him. "Don't." The single word was final. The king was calling for Vivian, wanting to discuss the next steps. She turned away from Damien without another word, and he was left standing alone on the dais while the woman he had destroyed walked away for the second time. But this time, she wasn't crying. She wasn't broken. She was magnificent. And she was gone. The ballroom emptied slowly, like blood draining from a wound. Damien stood on the dais long after Vivian had disappeared into the crowd of advisors and nobles clustered around her. The king had retreated to discuss the scandal with his ministers. The arrested men were gone, their protests still echoing in Damien's memory. What remained was the wreckage of everything he thought he knew about his own life. His legs felt unsteady. Not from drink, he was stone sober, but from the realization that for 3 years he had been building his empire on sand while thinking it was bedrock. Every decision, every alliance, every move he had made to consolidate power had been undermined by the men closest to him. And he had never noticed because he had been too busy looking down on everyone else to see the ground collapsing beneath his feet. "Your Grace." A servant appeared at his elbow, young and nervous. "Your carriage is waiting." Damien nodded without speaking and descended the dais. Walking through the remaining nobles felt like running a gauntlet. Their eyes tracked him with something worse than contempt. Pity. As if he were already a corpse, and they were just waiting for him to realize it and lie down. Outside, the night air was cold enough to hurt. Damien climbed into his carriage and sat in the darkness, not giving the driver any instructions. After a moment, the man assumed they were going home and started moving. The wheels clattered over cobblestones, a rhythm that matched the pounding in Damien's skull. He kept seeing her face, not the broken, tearful woman from 3 years ago. The other one, the stranger in emerald silk who had looked at him like he was a problem she had already solved. That woman terrified him in ways he didn't have words for, because she represented something he had never encountered before. A consequence he couldn't buy or threaten or manipulate his way out of. The carriage stopped. Damien looked out the window, expecting to see Blackthorn Manor. Instead, they were stopped in front of a townhouse he recognized. Seraphine's residence. His driver must have misunderstood which home he wanted, or maybe the man knew something Damien was only now beginning to understand. Blackthorn Manor hadn't been home in years. It was just the place where he kept his things and slept alone in a too-large bed. He climbed out and knocked. Seraphine answered the door herself, which meant she had dismissed the servants. She was still dressed for the evening, her gown a deep crimson that made her look like she was wrapped in blood. Her dark eyes scanned his face, and whatever she saw there made her smile falter. "So it's true," she said. That woman destroyed you in front of everyone. She exposed the truth, Damien corrected, stepping inside without being invited. There's a difference. Seraphine closed the door and leaned against it, arms crossed. Is there? Because from where I stood, it looked like your pathetic little wife finally grew a spine and decided to humiliate you the way you humiliated her. The casual cruelty in her voice was nothing new. Damien had always appreciated Seraphine's ruthlessness, the way she saw the world as a chessboard, and people as pieces to be moved or removed. It had felt like honesty in a world full of false pleasantries. Now it just felt ugly. She saved me, he said, more to himself than to Seraphine. She could have let Harding and the others finish what they started, but she exposed them instead. How noble. Seraphine's voice dripped sarcasm. I'm sure that makes you feel better about the fact that she's now the most powerful woman in England while you're practically bankrupt. I'm not bankrupt. Not yet. Seraphine pushed off the door and walked past him into her sitting room. She poured herself a drink without offering him one. But you will be if you don't do something drastic. Those men weren't your only problem, Damien. You've made enemies all over London. People who were only afraid to move against you because they thought you had unlimited resources and unshakable alliances. Now they know better. She was right. He hated that she was right. What do you suggest? He asked, following her into the room. Marry me. The words came out flat, transactional. Seraphine wasn't proposing. She was making a business offer. Damien stared at her. We've talked about this. Divorce is... You're already divorced. Your wife signed the papers years ago, or have you forgotten? All you need to do is make it official, marry me, and use my family's connections to rebuild. My father still has influence with Parliament. My brother controls half the textile trade in Europe. Together, we could recover what you've lost. And what do you get out of it? Seraphine smiled. The Blackthorn name? Whatever's left of your fortune. A title that still means something, even if you don't. She took a sip of her drink. Don't look so wounded, darling. We've never pretended this was about love. It's about power. It always has been. 3 years ago, Damien would have agreed, would have seen the logic and made the calculation and sealed the arrangement without a second thought. But standing in Seraphine's sitting room, looking at the woman he had destroyed his marriage for, all he could think about was Vivian's face when she had looked at him on that dais. The sadness in her eyes. Not anger, not hatred. Just this deep, resigned sorrow, like she was looking at something that could have been beautiful but was now just broken beyond repair. I need to think, he said. Seraphine's expression hardened. Think fast. Your creditors aren't going to wait much longer, and neither will I. If you can't see the value in what I'm offering, I'm sure someone else will. It was a threat, not even a subtle one. Damien left without another word. The carriage took him back to Blackthorn Manor, and he spent the rest of the night in his study, surrounded by financial documents that all told the same story. He was drowning. The debts were manageable if he had income, but his income had been systematically destroyed. The shipping routes were gone. The investments had collapsed. What remained were properties he couldn't sell without taking catastrophic losses, and a title that was increasingly worthless without the money to back it up. Dawn came gray and cold. Damien hadn't slept. He stood at the window watching the sun struggle through the clouds and felt something he couldn't name sitting heavy in his chest. It took him a long time to recognize it as shame. Not for being poor, he had been raised to believe poverty was a moral failing, so that shame was familiar. This was different, deeper. It was the shame of finally understanding what he had thrown away and why. Vivian had loved him, not for his money or his title or his influence. She had loved the man underneath all of that, the person he barely remembered being. And instead of seeing it as the gift it was, he had treated it like a burden, an inconvenience, and something to be ignored until it went away. And it had gone away. She had gone away. And now she was everything he had ever wanted to be, powerful, respected, untouchable. And he was everything he had once pitied, desperate, diminished, alone. The irony was so perfect, it felt like punishment from a god he didn't believe in. A knock on the study door interrupted his thoughts. Come in. His butler entered, looking uncomfortable. Your Grace, there's a gentleman here to see you. He says it's urgent. Did he give a name? Mr. Harrison Blake, Your Grace. He represents Ashford International. Damien's heart kicked against his ribs. Send him in. The man who entered was young, perhaps 30, dressed in an expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase. He had the kind of face that gave nothing away, professionally pleasant and completely unrevealing. Duke Blackthorne. Blake inclined his head. Thank you for seeing me on such short notice. I assume you're here on behalf of Lady Vivian. I am. Blake set his briefcase on the desk and opened it, pulling out a folder. My employer has asked me to present you with a proposal. Damien took the folder but didn't open it. What kind of proposal? A buyout. Blake's voice was calm, almost soothing. Lady Ashford is prepared to purchase Blackthorne Shipping in its entirety. She's offering a fair price, more than fair actually, considering the current state of the company's finances. Damien opened the folder. The number on the first page made his stomach drop. It was enough to pay off all his debts and leave him with a modest income for the rest of his life. It was also a fraction of what the company had been worth 5 years ago. This is insulting, he said quietly. It's generous, Blake corrected. Your company is hemorrhaging money, Your Grace. Without a significant capital infusion and complete restructuring, you'll be bankrupt within 6 months. Lady Ashford is offering you a way out. She wants me to give up everything my family built. She wants to preserve what's left before it collapses entirely. Blake pulled another document from his briefcase. She's also prepared to offer employment contracts to all your current workers. No one loses their job. The ships keep sailing. The only thing that changes is who owns them. And what do I get? Besides her charity. Blake's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Respect for knowing when to fold, perhaps. You get to keep your title and your estate. You get to walk away before this destroys you completely. And you get the knowledge that the people who depend on Blackthorne Shipping won't suffer for your mistakes. The words hit like physical blows. Damien looked down at the offer again. On paper, it was reasonable, practical, the smart move for someone in his position. But it also meant surrendering the last thing that made him who he was. Without the shipping empire, he wasn't Duke Damien Blackthorne, feared and respected across England. He was just another aristocrat with an old name and dwindling resources. He was nothing. I need time to consider, Damien said. Of course. Blake stood, leaving the documents on the desk. Lady Ashford is willing to give you 1 week to make your decision. After that, the offer expires and she'll pursue other opportunities. Other opportunities meaning she'll let me drown. Blake smiled thinly. I couldn't possibly speculate on my employer's intentions. He left. Damien sat alone with the offer, reading through every page, looking for hidden clauses or traps. There were none. It was exactly what Blake had said. A fair deal that would save him from complete ruin while transferring everything he had built to the woman he had destroyed. The woman who had rebuilt herself specifically to make this moment possible. He should have felt angry, betrayed, determined to find some way to fight back. Instead, all he felt was tired, so deeply, crushingly tired of fighting battles he had already lost. The week passed like a fever dream. Damien met with lawyers who confirmed what he already knew. The offer was legitimate and probably the best he was going to get. He met with creditors who made it clear they expected payment soon or they would start seizing assets. He met with Seraphine, who alternated between trying to seduce him into marriage and threatening to leave if he didn't make a decision. He met with everyone except the one person he actually wanted to talk to. Vivian remained unreachable. Her representatives handled all communication. Her offices were closed to unscheduled visitors. When Damien tried to attend a society event where he knew she would be present, he was politely but firmly turned away at the door. She had built walls around herself that he couldn't scale. And unlike the last time she had left him, these walls weren't made of hurt feelings and broken hearts. They were made of power and money and influence, the same things he had once used to keep her at a distance. The symmetry was devastating. On the 6th day, Damien did something he hadn't done in years. He went to see Lord Ashford. Vivian's father received him in a study that felt deliberately modest, like the old Earl was making a point about not flaunting wealth. Ashford looked even older than he had at the summit, gray and tired in a way that suggested he carried burdens Damien couldn't see. I wondered if you'd come, Ashford said, gesturing to a chair. Sit, if you like. Or stand. I don't particularly care about the formalities anymore. Damien sat. Where is she? I don't know. Ashford poured 2 glasses of whiskey and slid one across the desk. She doesn't tell me her plans. Hasn't for years. I get letters occasionally, very polite, asking about my health and updating me on her business ventures. But we're not close. Not anymore. Why not? Because I sold her to you. Ashford drank deeply. I knew what kind of man you were, Damien. Everyone knew. You made no secret of it. But I needed your political connections, and Vivian was young and romantic enough to believe she could change you. So I arranged the marriage and told myself it would work out. It didn't. No. Ashford's laugh was bitter. It very much did not. And when she came to me 3 years ago, asking for help leaving you, I gave her the one thing I should have given her from the beginning: freedom. I provided access to her mother's inheritance, money I had been holding in trust. I gave her my blessing to use our family name, and I promised never to interfere with whatever she chose to do next, even if that meant destroying me, especially then. Ashford met his eyes. You destroyed my daughter, Damien. You took a bright, loving woman and ground her down until there was nothing left. If she wants to return the favor, I'm not going to stop her. She's not destroying me, Damien said. She's offering to buy my company. That's not the same thing, isn't it? Ashford leaned back. You're a smart man. Surely you understand what she's really doing. She's giving you a choice. Take the deal and walk away with something, or refuse and lose everything. Either way, she wins. But if you take the deal, at least you get to keep your dignity. I don't have any dignity left. Then you have nothing to lose by accepting. The words sat between them like a challenge. Damien finished his whiskey in one swallow. Does she hate me? Ashford considered the question for a long time. I don't think so. I think she's moved past you entirely. Hate requires caring, and Vivian doesn't care about you anymore. You're just a business problem she's solving. Somehow, that was worse than hatred. Damien stood to leave, then paused at the door. If you see her, will you tell her something for me? Ashford raised an eyebrow. What? Tell her I understand now. What I threw away. What she was worth. Tell her I'm sorry it took losing everything to see it. I'll tell her, Ashford said quietly, but I don't think it will matter. I know. Damien left, and the truth of Ashford's words settled over him like a shroud. Vivian didn't care about his regrets or his realizations or his apologies. She had spent 3 years building a life where she didn't need him to acknowledge her worth because she had proven it to herself and everyone else. She had moved on, and he was still standing in the wreckage of the moment he had let her go. The 7th day arrived. Damien woke before dawn and dressed carefully, like he was preparing for battle. In a way, he was. Not a battle he could win, but one he needed to fight anyway because surrender required its own kind of courage. He went to his study and pulled out the contract Blake had left, read through it one final time, looking for any reason to refuse. Found none. Then he signed it. His hand was steady. That surprised him. He had expected trembling, hesitation, some physical manifestation of what this meant. Instead, there was just the scratch of pen on paper and the knowledge that with a few strokes of ink, he had ended 3 generations of Blackthorn control over the shipping empire that had defined his family. Done. He sealed the documents and sent for Blake, who arrived within the hour looking professionally unsurprised. The man had probably known Damien would accept. Everyone had known. I'll deliver these to Lady Ashford immediately, Blake said, tucking the contract into his briefcase. The transfer will be processed within the week. You should receive the first payment within 10 days. Tell her, Damien began, then stopped. What could he possibly say that would matter? Thank you. Blake nodded and left. Damien sat in the sudden silence of his study and waited to feel something. Relief, maybe. Or grief. Or even the bitter satisfaction of at least having made a decision. Instead, there was just numbness and the strange, floating sensation of having cut himself free from an anchor without knowing if he would float or sink. 3 days later, the money arrived. It was exactly what had been promised, deposited into his accounts with the kind of efficiency that spoke of a well-run organization that didn't make mistakes. Damien paid off his creditors, settled his debts, and arranged for the remaining funds to be managed conservatively so he would have income for the foreseeable future. On paper, he was saved. In reality, he was gutted. The news spread through London society like wildfire. Duke Blackthorn had sold his family's empire to his former wife. The woman he had abandoned had become his savior. The irony was too delicious for the gossips to resist, And within days, Damien couldn't go anywhere without hearing whispered conversations that stopped when he entered a room. Seraphine broke off their relationship with the letter so cold it could have frosted glass. She didn't bother with explanations or false sentiment. Just a brief note informing him that she had accepted a proposal from Lord Edmond Castellane, a French diplomat with extensive connections in Europe. She signed it without any of the endearments she had used when he was still useful to her. Damien burned the letter and felt nothing. He began spending his days walking through London, observing the city like a stranger seeing it for the first time. He watched merchants haggle in the market, saw couples strolling through parks, listened to children playing in the streets. All these people living their small, ordinary lives, completely unaware that the Duke of Blackthorn had become as powerless as any of them. It should have felt humiliating. Instead, it felt oddly peaceful. 1 month after signing the contract, Damien received an invitation. It was embossed with elegant script and sealed with wax that bore an unfamiliar crest, a phoenix rising from ashes. The card inside was simple. Lady Vivian Ashford requests the honor of your presence at the opening gala for the Ashford Foundation for Women's Independence. The date was 2 weeks away. Damien held the invitation for a long time, trying to decode its meaning. Was this an olive branch? A final twist of the knife? A test? He had no idea, and that uncertainty terrified him more than any clear threat would have. But he knew he would go. Not because he hoped for forgiveness or reconciliation, those ships had sailed and sunk years ago, but because he needed to see her one more time, needed to look into those cold blue eyes and try to find any trace of the woman who had loved him, even if it was just to confirm that she was truly gone. The 2 weeks crawled past. Damien had a new suit tailored for the occasion, then hated himself for caring about appearances. He practiced what he would say if he got the chance to speak to her, then realized anything he said would sound either desperate or hollow. He considered not going, considered going and leaving early, considered going and making a scene. In the end, he just went. The gala was held at an estate Vivian had purchased on the outskirts of London, a sprawling property that had been transformed into something between a school and a sanctuary. Damien arrived to find the grounds lit with hundreds of lanterns, the gardens filled with well-dressed guests, and everywhere signs of the foundation's work. Testimonials from women who had rebuilt their lives, displays of businesses they had started, photographs of children they were raising independently. It was impressive. It was also a perfect repudiation of everything Damien had believed about women needing men to give their lives meaning. He moved through the crowd feeling invisible. No one approached him. No one seemed to recognize him or care that he was there. He was just another guest at an event celebrating someone else's triumph. Then he saw her. Vivian stood on a terrace, overlooking the gardens, surrounded by admirers but somehow separate from them. She wore a gown of midnight blue that made her look like she had been carved from the night sky itself, and when she laughed at something one of her guests said, the sound carried across the garden like music. She was radiant. She was happy. And Damien realized with absolute certainty that she had built this happiness specifically in a world where he didn't exist. He started toward her before he could talk himself out of it. The crowd parted automatically, old habits of deference to his title dying hard, even though the title meant nothing anymore. He climbed the terrace steps and stopped a few feet away, waiting for her to notice him. She did. Their eyes met, and for just a second he thought he saw something flicker in her expression. Recognition, maybe? Or just the mild surprise of finding an unexpected guest. Then her professional mask slid back into place, and she excused herself from her admirers to approach him. "Duke Blackthorn," she said, her voice perfectly polite. "I'm glad you could attend. Thank you for the invitation." He paused. "I wasn't sure if I should come." "Why wouldn't you? This foundation exists partly because of you, after all." The words were delivered without malice, but they landed like punches anyway. "Vivian," Damien began, then realized he had no right to use her first name anymore. "Lady Ashford. I wanted to—" "To what?" She tilted her head slightly, genuinely curious. "Apologize. Explain. Ask for forgiveness. All of that. None of it. I don't know." She looked at him for a long moment, and he forced himself to meet her gaze without flinching. Let her see whatever she needed to see. Let her judge him and find him wanting. He deserved it. "Come with me," Vivian said finally. "Let's talk somewhere private." She led him through the manor to a small sitting room that overlooked the gardens. She closed the door behind them, and suddenly they were alone for the first time in 3 years. The silence stretched between them like a physical thing. "You signed the contract," Vivian said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Why?" The question surprised him. "Because I didn't have a choice." "Everyone has a choice, Damien. You could have refused, could have fought, could have tried to find another way to save your company." "There was no other way. You made sure of that. I made sure you had an option that wouldn't destroy the people who depend on Blackthorn shipping for their livelihoods." Vivian moved to the window, her back to him. "Whether you took it or not was your choice. You wanted me to take it." "Yes." "Why?" She turned to face him, and in the lamplight, he could finally see past the professional mask to something raw underneath. "Because I needed to know if you were capable of putting other people's welfare above your pride. I needed to know if the man I married was completely gone, or if there was something left worth salvaging." "And," his voice came out hoarse, "what did you find?" Vivian's smile was sad. "I found a man who made the right choice for the wrong reasons. You didn't accept my offer because you cared about your workers. You accepted it because you were beaten and you knew it. That's not growth, Damien. It's just surrender." The truth of it sat heavy in his chest. "You're right," he said quietly. "I am beaten. You won. Completely and thoroughly. Is that what you wanted to hear?" "I don't want to hear anything from you." Vivian's voice was steady, but he could hear the emotion underneath it. "I stopped wanting things from you 3 years ago. This," she gestured between them, "isn't about me getting closure or revenge or satisfaction. It's about you finally understanding that your actions have consequences you can't control or manipulate away. I understand that now. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you still think this is something you can fix. You came here tonight hoping for what, exactly? Forgiveness. A second chance. Some sign that I still care enough about you to be hurt or angry or anything at all." Damien opened his mouth to deny it, then realized she was right. That was exactly why he had come. He was still thinking like the old Damien, the one who believed every problem had a solution if you were smart enough and ruthless enough to find it. But Vivian wasn't a problem. She was a person he had broken, and she had taken the pieces and built something he could never touch. "I loved you," he said, and was shocked to hear the words come out. "Not then, not when we were married. But now, looking at what you've become, I think I finally understand what I lost. And I think if I had known then what I know now—" "You would have done exactly the same thing," Vivian interrupted, "because the man you were couldn't love anyone, could barely even recognize love when it was offered." She moved closer, and he could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive. "You didn't lose me, Damien. You threw me away. There's a difference." "I know. Good. Then you also know that this conversation is pointless." She opened the door, a clear dismissal. "I'm glad you came tonight. Glad you got to see what I've built. But we have nothing more to say to each other." Damien didn't move. "Can I ask you one thing?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Do you hate me?" Vivian considered the question, and in her silence he saw the depth of what he had lost. "No," she said finally. "I don't hate you. I don't feel anything about you at all. You're just someone I used to know." She walked out, leaving him alone in the sitting room with the weight of her indifference crushing his chest. Damien stood there for a long time before he finally forced himself to move. He left through a side entrance, avoiding the crowds, and climbed into his carriage. As they pulled away from the estate, he looked back one last time and saw Vivian through the window, laughing with her guests, glowing with a happiness that had nothing to do with him. And he understood, finally and completely, that this was it. There would be no redemption arc. No grand gesture that would win her back. No moment where she looked at him and remembered why she had loved him once. He had destroyed something irreplaceable, and the universe wasn't going to give him a second chance just because he finally realized what he had done. The carriage rolled through the London streets, taking him back to Blackthorn Manor, and Damien sat in the darkness thinking about the man he had been and the man he had become and the unbridgeable distance between them. Somewhere behind him, Vivian was building a future where he didn't exist, and ahead of him lay the rest of his life, stretching out empty and undefined, with no guidebook for how to be a man without power, without purpose, without the woman whose absence had finally taught him what love meant. He had no idea what came next. He only knew that whatever it was, he would have to face it alone. The weeks after the gala crawled by like wounded animals. Damien threw himself into what remained of his life with the desperate energy of a man trying to outrun his own thoughts. He restructured his finances, met with estate managers about maximizing efficiency at Blackthorn Manor, even considered taking up charitable work like other diminished aristocrats who needed something to fill their days. But everything felt hollow, performative, like he was playing the role of a reformed man without actually understanding what reform meant. The invitations stopped coming, not all at once, but gradually, like a tide receding to reveal the rocks underneath. Dinner parties he would have been expected to attend. Political gatherings where his opinion had once carried weight. Even the casual social events that made up the fabric of aristocratic life. One by one, they dried up until his calendar was empty and his evenings were spent alone in a manner that echoed with absence. He told himself it didn't matter, that he preferred the solitude. But the truth was harder and sharper. London society had made its judgment, and he had been found wanting. The Duke who had lost everything to his abandoned wife was no longer interesting enough to invite. He was just sad. 3 months after selling his company, Damien received an unexpected visitor. His butler announced the man with barely concealed surprise. Lord Christopher Harding. Damien looked up from the book he had been pretending to read, his stomach dropping. Harding was one of the 3 men Vivian had exposed at the summit, one of the traitors who had systematically destroyed his business from the inside. The man should have been in prison or at minimum exiled from polite society. Instead, he walked into Damien's study looking remarkably well for someone who had been publicly disgraced. Harding was tall and lean, with the kind of aristocratic features that made him look perpetually amused by private jokes. He wore an expensive suit that suggested his finances hadn't suffered despite the scandal, and when he smiled, it was the smile of a predator who knew he had already won. Duke Blackthorn. Harding settled into a chair without being invited. "You're looking well. Quiet life suits you." Damien's hand tightened on his book. "You have 30 seconds to explain why I shouldn't have you thrown out. Please. We both know you don't have the staff for that anymore." Harding crossed his legs comfortably. "I'm here because we have business to discuss. We have nothing to discuss. You betrayed me. Vivian exposed you. That chapter is closed." "Is it?" Harding pulled a silver cigarette case from his pocket and lit one despite Damien's obvious disapproval. "Because from where I'm sitting, that chapter is just getting interesting." Damien stood, furious. "Get out." "Sit down, Damien. You're going to want to hear this." Something in Harding's voice made him pause. Not the words themselves, but the absolute confidence underneath them. The certainty of a man holding cards his opponent didn't know existed. Damien sat slowly, every instinct screaming danger. Harding took a long drag from his cigarette and exhaled. "Let me tell you a story. 3 years ago, a woman came to me with an interesting proposal. She had recently left her husband and wanted revenge. Not the emotional kind, she was quite clear about that. She wanted systematic, surgical destruction of everything he had built, and she was willing to pay handsomely for it." Damien felt the blood drain from his face. "Of course," Harding continued, "I already had my own arrangements in place. Cross, Ashton, and I had been skimming from your operations for years. You were too arrogant to notice, too busy with your mistress to pay attention to the details. We were making a comfortable living off your inattention." He smiled. "But then this woman offered us something better. She offered us a partnership. You're lying." "Am I?" Harding pulled a folder from his jacket and tossed it onto the desk. "These are financial records, transfers from Ashford International to accounts controlled by myself, Cross, and Ashton, dating back 3 years. She paid us to accelerate our sabotage, to make it public, to ensure you were ruined beyond recovery." Damien opened the folder with shaking hands. The documents inside were dense with numbers and legal terminology, but the pattern was clear. Regular payments, substantial amounts, all traced back to companies that were subsidiaries of Vivian's empire. His vision blurred. "Why are you telling me this?" Harding stubbed out his cigarette. "Because Lady Ashford has decided we're no longer useful. She got what she wanted, your complete destruction, and now she's cutting ties. The payments have stopped. Worse, she's threatening to expose our arrangement if we don't disappear quietly." He leaned forward. "But I don't disappear quietly, Duke, and I don't like being discarded. So you want revenge on her. I want leverage. and you're going to help me get it." Damien stared at the man who had destroyed his business and felt something cold settle in his chest. "Why would I help you? You just admitted to betraying me, because she betrayed both of us," Harding said simply. "You thought she saved you at that summit, that she exposed us to protect the innocent workers. But it was all theater, Damien. She orchestrated the entire thing, paid us to betray you, then revealed the betrayal to make herself look noble while ensuring you'd have no choice but to sell to her." Damien wanted to call him a liar, wanted to throw him out and burn the documents and pretend this conversation had never happened. But the numbers didn't lie. The dates aligned too perfectly, and there was a terrible logic to it that explained things he hadn't wanted to examine too closely. "Why would she need you?" Damien's voice was hollow. "She was already destroying me on her own, but not fast enough." Harding retrieved another cigarette. "She wanted you crushed within a specific time frame, wanted to make sure you'd be desperate enough to accept her buyout offer. We provided the acceleration. The spectacle at the summit was just the finale." Damien felt like he was falling through space. The woman at the gala, the one who had looked at him with such devastating indifference. Had that been an act too? Had everything been calculated and performed for his benefit while she laughed behind her mask? "What do you want from me?" he asked. "Your signature." Harding produced another document. "This is a sworn statement detailing Lady Ashford's involvement in the conspiracy against you. With your testimony added to ours, we can take this to the king. Fraud, market manipulation, conspiracy. She'll be ruined the same way she ruined us." "And then what?" Damien didn't touch the document. "What happens after we destroy her? We rebuild. All of us." Harding's smile was sharp. "The shipping empire she stole from you? It's still vulnerable. She's overextended, made enemies, moved too fast. With the right pressure in the right places, we can force her to sell it back, possibly at a fraction of what she paid you. So I get my company back. We all get something back. Our reputations, our power, our dignity." Damien looked at the document, at Harding's expectant face, at the future being offered to him like a poisoned apple. Everything he had lost could be his again. All he had to do was destroy the woman who had destroyed him first, the woman who had apparently been manipulating him from the beginning. "I need time to think," Damien said. "You have 48 hours. After that, Cross, Ashton, and I move forward without you." Harding stood. "And Damien, if you're thinking about warning her, remember that she used you. She paid us to ruin you, then pretended to save you so she could take everything. Whatever you think you feel for her is based on a lie." He left. Damien sat in the silence, holding documents that rewrote everything he thought he understood about the last 3 years. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from rage so pure and cold it felt like clarity. She had played him, completely, perfectly. She had paid his enemies to betray him, then revealed their betrayal to force him into selling. Every moment of her apparent mercy had been calculated. Every gesture of goodwill had been strategy. She hadn't forgiven him or moved past him. She had systematically destroyed him while making him grateful for it. The genius of it was breathtaking. The cruelty of it was inhuman. Damien stood and walked to the window, looking out at grounds he could barely afford to maintain. Somewhere in London, Vivian was probably celebrating her victory, laughing with allies about how thoroughly she had fooled him. The pathetic Duke who had been so desperate for scraps of her attention that he never questioned why his salvation came from the woman he had wronged. He should sign Harding's document, should expose her the way she had exposed him, should watch her empire crumble and her reputation shred, and her carefully constructed facade of nobility collapse into the truth of what she really was. A woman so consumed by revenge that she had become worse than the man who hurt her. But something stopped him. Not mercy. Not lingering love. Something else. Something that felt like the last thread of the man he might have been if he had made different choices years ago. He needed to know if it was true. Not from Harding, not from documents that could be forged. From her. He needed to look Vivian in the eyes and ask her directly if she had orchestrated his destruction. If everything had been lies and manipulation. If the woman who had knelt before him 3 years ago had transformed into someone capable of this level of calculated cruelty. And if the answer was yes, if she confirmed that she had paid his enemies to ruin him, that she had staged her own mercy for maximum impact, that every moment of apparent growth and strength had been part of an elaborate revenge plot. Then he would sign Harding's document and burn her world down. Damien called for his carriage. The sun was setting by the time he reached Vivian's London residence, an elegant townhouse in Mayfair that had probably cost more than Blackthorn Manor was worth now. He knocked, was told by a severe-looking butler that Lady Ashford was not receiving visitors, and pushed past the man anyway. He found her in a study that could have been mistaken for a military command center. Maps covered the walls showing trade routes and shipping lanes. Ledgers and financial reports were stacked on every surface. She sat behind a massive desk wearing a simple dress, her hair pulled back, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed documents. She looked up when he entered, and her expression went carefully blank. "Get out," she said quietly. "You're trespassing." "Did you pay them?" Damien's voice was raw. "Harding, Cross, Ashton, did you pay them to betray me?" Vivian set down her pen very slowly. "Where did you hear that?" "Answer the question." "Or what?" She stood, and even in this private space, she radiated the same cold authority he had seen at the gala. "You'll expose me, ruin my reputation, destroy what I've built." She walked around the desk, closing the distance between them. "Go ahead, Damien. Try. Just tell me the truth. Why? So you can feel justified in hating me. So you can tell yourself that everything that happened was my fault instead of yours. Everything." The word came out like a growl. "You manipulated everything, paid my enemies, staged my downfall, made me beg you to save me when you were the one orchestrating my destruction from the beginning." Vivian tilted her head, studying him like he was a puzzle she was solving. "Let me ask you something, Damien. If I told you yes, that I paid them, that I planned every detail, that I manipulated you into selling your company to me, would it change anything? It would mean you're exactly what I always believed: cold, calculating, incapable of genuine feeling. And if I told you no, if I swore I had nothing to do with their betrayal, would you believe me?" The question hung between them like a blade. Damien realized with sick certainty that he didn't know the answer. His trust had been so thoroughly destroyed by Harding's revelations, by his own paranoia, by 3 years of learning that nothing was what it seemed, that he couldn't tell truth from manipulation anymore. "I want to believe you," he said finally. "But you don't." Vivian's smile was bitter. "Because you can't imagine a world where I succeeded without cheating, where I rebuilt myself through intelligence and work and strategic planning instead of revenge plots and paid conspiracies. Then tell me you didn't do it." "No." The word hit like a fist. Damien stared at her. "What?" "I'm not going to defend myself to you," Vivian said. "I'm not going to explain my business practices or justify my decisions or prove my innocence to a man who never gave me the courtesy of doubt when we were married." She moved closer, and he could see the fury burning beneath her controlled exterior. "You want the truth, Damien. Here it is. I don't owe you anything, not explanations, not confessions, not absolution for whatever you're feeling right now." "Did you pay them?" His voice was desperate now. "Just answer the question. Figure it out yourself." Vivian returned to her desk. "And when you do, ask yourself why it matters. Whether I paid them or not, you still made every decision that led to your downfall. You still treated me like garbage. You still threw away our marriage for a woman who abandoned you the second you lost your money." Her eyes met his, cold and clear. "So sign whatever document Harding gave you. Expose me. Try to destroy what I've built. And see what happens when you come after someone who spent 3 years learning exactly how to protect herself from men like you." She knew. Somehow she knew about Harding's offer. Damien felt the ground shift beneath him again. "How long have you known?" "Since about 30 seconds after Harding left your estate." Vivian's smile was sharp. "I have people watching him, watching all of them. Did you really think I'd leave loose ends? So this was a test." "Everything is a test, Damien. That's what you taught me." She returned to her documents, dismissing him. "Now get out of my house." He should have left, should have walked out and signed Harding's document and let the pieces fall where they would. But his feet wouldn't move. Because despite everything, the rage, the betrayal, the manipulation, he still couldn't shake the image of her kneeling before him 3 years ago. That woman had been real. Whatever Vivian had become, she had started as someone genuine and loving and brave enough to beg for a chance he had refused to give. and he had destroyed her so thoroughly that she had rebuilt herself into this. A woman who could orchestrate conspiracies or inspire loyalty depending on which served her purposes better. A woman so completely armored against him that he couldn't tell where the performance ended and the person began. "Did I do this to you?" he asked quietly. "Did I turn you into this?" Vivian looked up from her papers, and for just a second, the mask slipped. He saw exhaustion underneath, pain, the weight of 3 years spent building walls so high and strong that nothing could ever hurt her again. "Yes," she said, "you did this to me. You and every other man who taught me that vulnerability is weakness and love is just another word for leverage." She stood again, and this time when she approached, there was something raw in her expression. "You want to know if I paid Harding? Fine. I'll tell you." She stopped inches away from him. "I didn't pay them to betray you. They were already doing that on their own. But when I started building my company and they approached me, offering information about your operations in exchange for money, I took the deal. I paid them for intelligence, for trade secrets, for every weakness in your empire that I could exploit." Her voice was steady, relentless. "And when I had enough information to destroy you, I made a choice. I could let them keep bleeding you dry while enriching themselves, or I could expose them and force you to sell to me." "Why expose them?" "Because I didn't want you destroyed by thieves, Damien. I wanted you destroyed by me." Vivian's eyes were blazing now. "I wanted you to know that the woman you abandoned became powerful enough to take everything from you, that when you lost your empire, it went to the wife you threw away. That was the point. Not letting Harding and his friends profit, making sure you understood exactly what you lost when you walked away from me. So it was revenge. It was justice." She turned away, her shoulders rigid. "You taught me that power is the only thing that matters, that sentiment is weakness, that love is currency to be spent or withheld based on utility. I learned those lessons well, Damien, and I used them to beat you at your own game." Damien felt something break in his chest. "And now? What happens now? Now you make a choice." Vivian retrieved a folder from her desk and held it out. "These are documents proving that Harding, Cross, and Ashton forged the evidence they showed you. The payments they claim came from me were actually from shell companies they created. They're trying to manipulate you into destroying me so they can reclaim the shipping empire for themselves." Damien took the folder with numb hands. Inside were bank records, corporate filings, communications between the three men outlining their plan. Everything Harding had told him was built on fabricated evidence designed to turn him against Vivian. "They played you," Vivian said. "Again. Just like they played you for years while they stole from you. The question is whether you're smart enough to see it this time. Why are you giving me this? Because despite everything, I don't want to see you make the same mistakes." She moved to the window, her back to him. "You have a choice, Damien. You can believe Harding and sign his document and watch everything you have left burn down when the forgeries are exposed. Or you can use these documents to expose him and finally start rebuilding something real. And what do you get out of it? The satisfaction of knowing you finally learned to recognize a real enemy from a complicated ally." Damien looked at the documents, at Vivian's rigid back, at the chessboard their lives had become. Every instinct he had developed over years of business and politics was screaming conflicting advice. Trust her. Don't trust her. This is a trap. This is salvation. She's lying. She's the only one telling the truth. He realized with sudden, terrible clarity that he had no idea how to read people anymore. Years of assuming everyone wanted something from him, of treating relationships as transactions and love as manipulation, had left him completely unable to recognize genuine help even when it was handed to him with documentation. "How do I know this is real?" he asked. "You don't." Vivian finally turned to face him. "That's what trust means, Damien. Taking a risk on incomplete information because you believe the person offering help is operating in good faith." She smiled sadly. "But you don't know how to do that, do you? You never learned. You could be lying." "I could be. So could Harding. So could everyone you've ever met." She crossed her arms. "At some point, you have to decide who to believe. And that choice says more about you than it does about them." The silence stretched between them, heavy with 3 years of damage and hurt and transformation. Damien looked down at the documents in his hands, at the choice being offered, at the man he had been and the man he was becoming and the vast, terrifying space between them. "If I expose Harding," he said slowly, "what happens to you?" Nothing. I'm protected. But you'll have removed the last threat to what remains of your life. And if I don't, if I sign Harding's document instead, then you'll destroy us both, and he'll take everything we have left. Vivian's voice was matter of fact. He's not offering you partnership, Damien. He's offering you mutual destruction. The moment you're no longer useful, he'll discard you the same way you think I did. Why do you care what happens to me? I don't. Her words were flat. But I care about the precedent. If Harding succeeds in using you against me, every enemy I've made will try the same tactic. So consider this enlightened self-interest. Damien studied her face, trying to find any trace of the woman who had loved him. All he saw was armor. Walls. The impenetrable fortress she had built around whatever remained of her heart. And he realized that it didn't matter whether she was lying or telling the truth. What mattered was what he chose to believe. 3 years ago, he had chosen to believe that Vivian's love was worthless, that Seraphine's calculation was more valuable than his wife's devotion, that power and control mattered more than connection and trust. And those choices had destroyed everything. Now he was being offered the same test in different clothes. Believe the enemy offering empty promises of restored glory, or believe the woman who had every reason to hate him but was handing him the tools to save himself anyway. Damien closed the folder. I'll expose Harding, he said. Vivian's expression didn't change. Smart choice. I'm not doing it for you, I know. She returned to her desk. You're doing it because you finally learned to recognize when you're being played. That's growth, I suppose. Limited, but growth. The casual dismissal in her voice made him angry. You really feel nothing for me anymore. What do you want me to feel, Damien? Vivian looked up, and for the first time he heard genuine frustration in her voice. You want me to still love you so you can feel less guilty about what you did. You want me to hate you so you can feel like a victim of my revenge. You want anything except what I actually feel, which is tired. Of what? Of this. She gestured between them. Of you showing up demanding answers and closure and absolution. Of having to explain myself to a man who never explained anything to me. She stood, and he could see the exhaustion bleeding through her armor. I gave you those documents because I don't want to spend the next decade fighting legal battles with Harding. Not because I care about you. Not because I've forgiven you. Because I want you to stop being a liability and turn into someone who can at least recognize his own interests long enough to protect them. The words landed like blows. Damien backed toward the door, clutching the folder. I'll take care of Harding. See that you do. Vivian had already returned to her work. And Damien, don't come back here. If you need to communicate with me, do it through lawyers or business intermediaries. We're not friends. We're not allies. We're just two people who used to be married and are now trying to exist in the same city without destroying each other. Is that all we are? She didn't look up. That's all we've ever been. He left. The night air hit him like cold water. Damien stood on Vivian's steps, looking out at London's glittering lights, and felt more alone than he ever had. Not because she had rejected him, he had expected that, but because she had done it with such complete, devastating indifference. She didn't hate him enough to be cruel. She didn't love him enough to be kind. She just wanted him to stop being a problem and disappear from her life completely. And the worst part was that she was right. Every instinct he had to fight back, to demand more, to force some kind of emotional reaction from her was just his old patterns repeating. The same patterns that had destroyed their marriage in the first place. He had to change. Not because he hoped to win her back. That ship had sailed into an ocean where it would never be found. But because the alternative was spending the rest of his life as Harding's pawn or some other manipulator's tool, bouncing between people who saw him as useful until they didn't. Damien walked to his carriage holding documents that could save or damn him depending on what he chose to believe about the woman who had given them to him. And for the first time in his life, he chose to trust something he couldn't verify or control. He chose to believe Vivian was telling the truth, not because he had evidence, not because it served his interests, but because the alternative, living in a world where no one could be trusted and every gesture of help was a trap, was a world he couldn't survive in. That realization should have felt like weakness. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing he'd done in years. Damien spent 3 days verifying every document Vivian had given him. He hired investigators he trusted, or rather, the few who would still work for a disgraced duke with limited funds. He cross-referenced bank records, traced corporate structures, interviewed people who had witnessed the transactions. Every thread led back to the same conclusion. Harding, Cross, and Ashton had fabricated the evidence against Vivian. The shell companies were real. The forgeries were sophisticated but detectable. The conspiracy to manipulate him into destroying her was documented in their own careless communications. They had underestimated him, assumed he was too broken to do proper due diligence, too desperate for revenge to question anything that confirmed his worst suspicions about the woman who had taken everything from him. They were wrong. On the fourth day, Damien sent a message to Lord Christopher Harding requesting a meeting at Blackthorn Manor. Private. Urgent. The kind of summons that suggested capitulation. Harding arrived within hours, bringing Cross and Ashton with him. The three men walked into Damien's study with the confidence of predators who believed they had already cornered their prey. Gentlemen? Damien remained seated behind his desk, a calculated insult they pretended not to notice. Thank you for coming. Harding smiled that predator's smile. We were hoping you'd see reason. Do you have the signed statement? I have something better. Damien pulled out the folder Vivian had given him and added his own investigation results on top. I have proof that you fabricated evidence against Lady Ashford, that the shell companies paying you were created by you, that this entire conspiracy was designed to use me as a weapon against her while enriching yourselves. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Cross, a portly man with nervous hands, started to speak. Duke Blackthorn, I assure you... Don't. Damien's voice cut through the attempt at deflection like a blade. I've spent 3 days verifying every detail. I know about the forged bank transfers, the fabricated communications, the shell corporations registered under false names that trace back to your personal attorneys. He leaned forward. You didn't just lie to me, you were sloppy about it. Harding's smile had vanished. You're making a mistake. The only mistake I made was listening to you in the first place. Damien stood, gathering the documents. Tomorrow morning, I'm delivering this evidence to the King's investigators. They'll find the same patterns I did. And when they're done, you'll be lucky if prison is the worst thing that happens to you. Ashton, the youngest of the three, went pale. You can't prove... I can prove all of it. Damien's voice was flat. You got greedy. Started believing your own fiction. Left trails everywhere because you thought I was too desperate to look closely. Harding's expression hardened into something ugly. You think Lady Ashford is innocent in this, that she didn't manipulate you just as thoroughly as we did. She paid you for information. Damien met his eyes. That's business. What you did was fraud and conspiracy. There's a difference, and the law will recognize it even if you don't. So that's it. Harding stood slowly. You're choosing her over us. I'm choosing facts over fiction. What happens next is just consequences. The three men exchanged glances, and Damien saw the calculation happening behind their eyes. They were cornered, and they knew it. Cornered predators were the most dangerous kind, but Damien had prepared for that too. His remaining loyal servants were stationed outside the study. The evidence was already copied and stored in 3 separate locations. If anything happened to him tonight, it would all go to the authorities anyway. He had finally learned to protect himself. You're going to regret this, Harding said quietly. Probably. Damien moved toward the door, opening it in clear dismissal. But I'll regret it as a free man instead of someone's puppet. They left, and the rage in their silence was palpable. Damien watched them go and felt something settle in his chest. Not peace, he was too far gone for that, but a grim satisfaction that came from finally making a decision based on truth instead of emotion or ego or desperate hope. He had chosen correctly. And if he was going to burn for it, at least he would burn standing up. The next morning, Damien delivered his evidence to the King's court. The reception was formal and cold. He was still a disgraced duke, after all, and his credibility was questionable. But the documents spoke for themselves. Within hours, investigators were dispatched. Within days, bank accounts were frozen. Within a week, warrants were issued for Harding, Cross, and Ashton's arrests. They ran. All 3 of them vanished the night before the King's guards arrived to take them into custody. Fled London with whatever portable wealth they could carry, leaving behind estates and businesses and families to face the consequences of their crimes. It was a confession of guilt as clear as any signed statement. The scandal consumed London society for weeks. Every dinner party, every social gathering, Every private club buzzed with the story of how three respected noblemen had been exposed as frauds by the Duke they had tried to manipulate. Damien's role in bringing them to justice didn't restore his reputation. He was still the man who had lost everything to his abandoned wife. But it shifted the narrative slightly. He was no longer just pathetic. He was dangerous in a way people hadn't expected. A cornered animal who had remembered how to bite back. Vivian sent no message, no acknowledgement, no thank you or well done or even basic courtesy. It was like she had already forgotten he existed the moment he walked out of her townhouse. Damien told himself he didn't care. He was lying, but the lie felt necessary for survival. 2 months passed in strange limbo. Damien restructured what remained of his life with the meticulous attention of someone building on scorched earth. He sold off properties he didn't need, invested conservatively, learned to live within means he would have once considered poverty. He stopped attending social events entirely, stopped chasing the approval of people who had already written him off. He became invisible. It should have felt like defeat. Instead, it felt like the first honest existence he'd had in years. No performances, no masks. Just a man living in the ruins of his own choices and trying to figure out what came next. Then the invitation arrived. It was delivered by royal messenger, sealed with the king's personal crest. Damien opened it with hands that didn't shake anymore. He'd learned to control that tell, and read the contents twice to make sure he understood. His Majesty requests your presence at a royal tribunal regarding the Ashford International Trade Dispute. Your testimony may be required. The date was 3 days away. Damien had heard whispers about the dispute. Apparently, several European trade consortiums had filed complaints against Vivian, claiming she had used illegal methods to dominate their shipping routes. The accusations were serious enough that the king had ordered an investigation. If she was found guilty, her entire empire could be dismantled. And Damien's testimony about her business practices could be the deciding factor. He stared at the invitation for a long time, understanding the choice being offered. Vivian had enemies who wanted her destroyed. They needed evidence of wrongdoing. And who better to provide it than the ex-husband she had ruined? The man who had every reason to want revenge. If he testified against her, he could watch her empire collapse the way his had, could see her experience the same humiliation and loss, could finally achieve the revenge that Harding had offered through legitimate means. All he had to do was tell the truth about her business practices, the aggressive tactics, the ruthless competition, the way she had paid his own betrayers for information. None of it was technically illegal, but in the right light, with the right framing, it could be made to look criminal. He could destroy her. The realization sat in his chest like a stone. This was the test Vivian had probably anticipated from the moment she handed him those documents. She had saved him from Harding's trap, but in doing so, she had given him everything he needed to become her enemy through official channels. She had armed him, and then trusted him not to use the weapons against her. Or maybe she didn't trust him at all. Maybe she was just that confident in her own protections. Either way, the choice was his. Damien spent the next 3 days in an agony of indecision that felt like being pulled apart. Every instinct of self-preservation screamed to testify against her. She had destroyed him, taken his empire, made him small and powerless and irrelevant. Why should he protect her now? But another voice, quieter, newer, harder to ignore, kept asking different questions. What did revenge actually accomplish? If he destroyed Vivian, would it restore anything he had lost? Or would it just confirm that he was exactly the man she believed him to be? Petty, vindictive, incapable of growth. The morning of the tribunal arrived without him reaching a conclusion. Circuits. Damien dressed carefully, like he was going to war. In a way he was. Not against Vivian, but against the man he used to be. The Duke who had measured worth in power and saw other people as obstacles or tools. That man would have testified against her without hesitation. The question was whether Damien was still that man, or if 3 years of loss had actually changed something fundamental. He arrived at the royal court to find it packed with nobles, merchants, and politicians. Everyone who had a stake in international trade had come to watch Vivian's potential downfall. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation and barely concealed glee. The powerful woman who had risen so far so fast was about to be cut down, and people loved watching that spectacle. Damien took his seat and waited. Vivian entered, flanked by lawyers, and the room went silent. She wore a severe black gown that made her look like a widow attending a funeral, possibly her own. Her face was a mask of professional composure, but Damien had learned to read the tiny tells, the slight tension in her jaw, the way her hands gripped her folder just a fraction too tightly. She was afraid. It was not of losing. Vivienne had proven she could survive anything, but of being humiliated, of having her carefully constructed empire torn apart by men who couldn't stand to see a woman succeed where they had failed. Their eyes met across the courtroom, and for just a second, something passed between them. Not forgiveness or trust or anything soft, just recognition. Two people who had destroyed each other and somehow survived standing on opposite sides of another battlefield. Then she looked away, and the mask was back in place. The tribunal began. The accusations were read first. A litany of aggressive business practices, predatory pricing, allegedly stolen trade secrets. Each charge was carefully worded to sound damning while remaining just vague enough to be difficult to disprove. Vivienne's lawyers responded to each with documentation and testimony from witnesses. Hours passed in tedious legal maneuvering. Then the king's prosecutor called Damien to testify. The walk to the witness stand felt like crossing a frozen lake, each step potentially the one that would crack the ice and send him plunging into water that would kill him. Every eye in the courtroom tracked his movement. He could feel the weight of their expectations, their hunger for scandal. He was sworn in, and the prosecutor began. Duke Blackthorne, you were married to Lady Vivienne Ashford for 3 years. Is that correct? Yes. And during that time, what was your impression of her character and business ethics? The question was designed to let him destroy her with implications. Any negative comment about her character could be extrapolated into evidence of criminal intent. The prosecutor was practically gift-wrapping the opportunity for revenge. Damien looked at Vivienne. She sat perfectly still, her expression revealing nothing. But he could see the slight pulse at her throat beating faster than it should, the only sign that she was human underneath all that armor. My impression, Damien said carefully, was that she was far more intelligent than I gave her credit for. The prosecutor frowned slightly. Could you elaborate? She saw weaknesses in business systems that I overlooked, identified opportunities I missed, made connections I was too arrogant to pursue. He kept his voice neutral. When we were married, I dismissed her opinions because I believed business was beyond her understanding. I was wrong. A murmur ran through the courtroom. This wasn't the testimony they had expected. The prosecutor tried again. But you're aware she acquired your shipping company under questionable circumstances. She acquired it through a legal buyout after I mismanaged it into near bankruptcy. Damien's voice was flat. The circumstances were only questionable if you believe a woman can't legitimately outmaneuver a man in business. Duke Blackthorne, I know what you want me to say. That she cheated, that she manipulated, that her success must be built on deception, because how else could a woman dominate an industry men have controlled for centuries? Damien leaned forward. But I reviewed her business practices extensively after the sale. Everything she did was legal. Aggressive, yes. Ruthless, absolutely. But legal. The prosecutor's expression hardened. You're aware she paid your business associates for confidential information. I'm aware she purchased information from people who were already stealing from me. Damien met the man's eyes. That's called competitive intelligence. Men do it all the time, and we call it shrewd. When a woman does it, apparently it's evidence of criminal conspiracy. The courtroom erupted. The king raised a hand for silence, his expression unreadable. Duke Blackthorne, are you saying you have no evidence of wrongdoing on Lady Ashford's part? Damien took a breath. This was it. The moment where he chose what kind of man he was going to be. Not for Vivienne, not for redemption or forgiveness or any hope of reconciliation, just for himself. For the person he wanted to see when he looked in the mirror. I'm saying that every accusation I've heard today could be leveled at any successful merchant or trader in this room. The only difference is that Lady Ashford is a woman, and we're not accustomed to women beating us at our own game. He paused. She outworked me, outthought me, outplanned me. And instead of admitting that I was bested by someone better, I spent years looking for excuses, conspiracies, anything that would let me avoid the truth. What truth is that? That I lost because I deserved to lose, and she won because she deserved to win. The silence was deafening. Damien stood. If this tribunal is genuinely investigating illegal business practices, I suggest you start with the European consortiums that filed these complaints. I have evidence that they've been engaged in price fixing, bribery, and actual trade secret theft for years. He pulled documents from his jacket. Lady Ashford's only crime was refusing to play along with their cartels. He handed the papers to the bailiff. The prosecutor was sputtering. "Where did you get—" "From the same investigators who exposed Harding, Cross, and Ashton." Damien's voice was cold. "Turns out when you actually look at the evidence, instead of just accepting accusations at face value, you find interesting patterns, like the fact that every company accusing Lady Ashford has recently lost market share to her, and that they all use the same lawyers to file these complaints, and that those lawyers are on retainer for a consortium that's been trying to monopolize European trade for a decade." The courtroom erupted again, louder this time. Damien returned to his seat, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had just burned every remaining bridge he had with London's merchant class, made enemies of powerful people who could make his life even more difficult than it already was, sacrificed whatever small reputation he had rebuilt, all to tell the truth about a woman who didn't love him and never would. The tribunal continued for hours, but the damage was done. Damien's testimony had shifted the entire narrative. What had started as an investigation into Vivienne's practices became an investigation into her accusers. Documents were examined, witnesses were questioned. Slowly, the conspiracy unraveled. By the end of the day, the king dismissed the charges against Vivienne and ordered a full investigation into the European consortiums. The courtroom cleared slowly, people whispering and speculating. Damien sat alone, exhausted and oddly empty. He had done the right thing. He knew that. But right things didn't always feel good. Sometimes they just felt necessary. Duke Blackthorne. He looked up to find Vivienne standing beside his seat. Her lawyers had dispersed, the crowds had thinned, they were as alone as two people could be in a public space. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I didn't do it for you. I know." She studied his face like she was seeing him for the first time. "Why did you do it?" "Because those accusations were false, and I've spent enough time supporting lies." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. "You made powerful enemies today," Vivienne said. "The consortiums won't forget this." "I know. You'll need protection. Allies." Her voice was careful. "I can offer—" "No." Damien cut her off gently. "I don't want your protection. I don't want to be another piece on your chessboard." "Then what do you want?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Damien realized he didn't have an answer. For 3 years, he had wanted revenge, then redemption, then just to understand what had happened. But now, standing in the ruins of both their former lives, he didn't know what he wanted anymore. "To stop being defined by what I lost," he said finally. "To figure out who I am when I'm not a duke with an empire or a man seeking revenge. Just someone who exists." Vivienne's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "That's the first honest thing I've heard you say in years. It's the first honest thing I've said to myself in years." She nodded slowly, and something shifted in her eyes. Not forgiveness, not love, but maybe the beginning of something like respect. The courtroom doors burst open. A royal guard rushed in, his face flushed with exertion. "Lady Ashford, Duke Blackthorne, the king requests your immediate presence. There's been an incident." "What kind of incident?" Vivienne asked. The guard's expression was grim. "Lord Christopher Harding has returned to London. He's taken hostages at the East India docks. He's demanding to speak with both of you." Damien felt his blood turn to ice. How many hostages? 43 workers, mostly families who live on the dock properties. The guard's voice was tight. "He's threatening to burn the warehouses with them inside unless you both surrender yourselves within the hour." Vivienne and Damien exchanged glances, and in that moment they understood each other perfectly. Harding had nothing left to lose. He had been cornered, humiliated, stripped of everything, and cornered predators didn't think rationally. They just lashed out at whatever they could reach. "We have to go," Vivienne said. "It's a trap," Damien replied. "He wants us dead." "I know." She was already moving toward the door. "But those are innocent people. We don't have a choice." They rushed through the palace corridors to where carriages waited. The ride to the docks was silent, both of them processing the reality of what they were about to walk into. Harding wanted revenge. He wanted them to suffer the way he had suffered, and he had just given himself the perfect leverage. The docks came into view, and Damien's stomach dropped. 3 warehouses were surrounded by royal guards, but they couldn't approach because Harding had positioned hostages in the windows. Men, women, children, all of them visible, all of them terrified. Smoke was already rising from one building. Harding wasn't bluffing about the fire. The carriage stopped, and Vivian stepped out first. Damien followed, his mind racing through scenarios and outcomes. None of them were good. A lieutenant approached. "My lady, your grace, Lord Harding has demanded you enter the central warehouse alone. No guards, no weapons. He says if anyone else approaches, he starts killing hostages." "Where are Cross and Ashton?" Damien asked. "Dead." The lieutenant's voice was flat. "We found their bodies in a boarding house this morning. Harding killed them both." "So he's completely unhinged," Vivian said quietly. "Perfect. You don't have to do this," the lieutenant said. "We can wait him out, negotiate, while he burns those buildings with families inside." Vivian shook her head. "No, we go in." Damien grabbed her arm. "This is suicide." She looked at him, and he saw steel in her eyes. "Then we die saving innocent people instead of living with their blood on our hands." "That's the deal. There has to be another way." "There isn't." She pulled free from his grip. "And you know it." She was right. Damien knew she was right. But walking into that warehouse felt like walking into his own grave. Every survival instinct he had was screaming to run, to let the guards handle it, to put distance between himself and the madman with nothing left to lose. But he also knew that if he ran now, he would never be able to look at himself again. "Are you ready?" Vivian asked. "No," Damien said, "but I'm going anyway." They walked toward the central warehouse side by side, and Damien had the strange, detached thought that this was how it should have been from the beginning. 2 people facing danger together instead of tearing each other apart. The warehouse door loomed ahead, smoke seeping through the cracks. Behind them, the guards waited with weapons ready but useless. Inside, Harding waited with hostages and fire and rage. Vivian reached for the door handle, and Damien put his hand over hers. "Whatever happens in there," he said quietly, "I want you to know that I'm sorry. For all of it." She looked at him, and for just a second, the armor cracked. "I know." They pushed the door open together and stepped into the smoke-filled darkness where a madman waited to drag them both into hell. The smoke inside the warehouse was thick enough to choke on. Damien's eyes watered as he and Vivian stepped through the door into a darkness cut only by flickering firelight from the far corner. The heat was already oppressive, a living thing that pressed against his skin and made every breath feel like swallowing glass. He could hear crying somewhere in the shadows. Children. The sound cut through his fear and replaced it with something colder and more focused. "Close the door," a voice called from the darkness. "Both of you, slowly." Damien recognized Harding's voice, but it was different now. Higher. Strained. The controlled predator from their first meeting had been replaced by something feral and unpredictable. He pulled the door shut behind them, and the sound echoed through the vast space like a coffin lid closing. "Where are the hostages?" Vivian called out. Her voice was steady despite the smoke. "Let me see them." Light flared as Harding lit a lantern, and the scene resolved into nightmare clarity. 43 people huddled in the center of the warehouse floor, bound together with rope. Families clutching children, old men who worked the docks, women who had been loading cargo when Harding arrived. All of them terrified, all of them looking at Damien and Vivian like they were either salvation or just 2 more victims joining them in hell. Harding stood on a stack of crates, holding the lantern in one hand and a pistol in the other. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were rumpled, his face unshaven, his eyes burning with a fever that had nothing to do with the fire he'd started. "There they are," Harding said, gesturing with the pistol at the hostages. 43 innocent people whose lives mean nothing to either of you. Just like Cross and Ashton meant nothing when you had them hunted down. "We didn't hunt anyone," Damien said, keeping his voice level. "You killed Cross and Ashton yourself, because they were weak." Harding's laugh was unhinged. They wanted to run, hide, accept defeat like cowards. I showed them what happens to cowards, by murdering them, by teaching them that there are worse things than losing. Harding aimed the pistol at Vivian, like watching the woman who destroyed you stand in the ashes of everything you built and feel nothing. "I feel plenty," Vivian said quietly, "but not about you. The casual dismissal was like gasoline on fire. Harding's face twisted with rage. You took everything from me. My reputation, my fortune, my future. And for what? Because a pathetic duke couldn't satisfy his wife, so she decided to punish everyone who worked with him. I didn't take anything you didn't offer to sell, Vivian replied. You betrayed Damien for profit. I just made sure you didn't profit from the betrayal. You manipulated us, used us. Harding was shouting now, spittle flying. We were just business partners conducting normal affairs until you turned it into a crusade. You were thieves, Damien said. The anger in his chest was building, but he forced it down. Anger wouldn't save anyone here. Only clear thinking and careful words. You stole from me for years. Vivian just exposed what you were already doing. And you, Harding swung the pistol toward Damien, you testified against me, handed over evidence that destroyed any chance I had of rebuilding. After everything I offered you, the partnership, the revenge, the opportunity to reclaim what that woman stole. She didn't steal it. I gave it to her. Damien took a step forward, drawing Harding's attention away from Vivian and the hostages. I signed the contract freely because I finally understood that my empire was built on sand. You helped me see that. So thank you. The sarcasm made Harding's hand shake. You think you're better than me now. Reformed. Redeemed. The Duke who learned his lesson. I think I'm exactly what I deserve to be. Damien took another step. A man who lost everything because he was too proud to see the people around him clearly. That includes you. I should have known you were stealing, should have paid attention, should have cared about the business instead of using it as a trophy to wave around. So this is your fault too. Most of it, yes. The admission seemed to throw Harding off balance. He had expected defensiveness, excuses, not this calm acceptance of responsibility. His pistol wavered slightly. Vivienne used the moment to move closer to the hostages. You don't want to hurt these people, Christopher. They have nothing to do with our conflict, don't they? Harding's laugh was bitter. These are the workers who kept Blackthorn shipping running, who took orders from a duke who didn't know their names, who now work for a woman who bought their loyalty along with everything else. They're symbols of everything that's wrong with this world, how the powerful use the powerless and call it business. Then let them go, Vivian said. Keep us. We're the ones you want revenge against. Oh, I intend to keep you. Harding raised the pistol again, this time aiming directly at Vivian's head. But they stay too. They get to watch what happens when people like you finally face consequences. Damien's mind was racing. The fire in the corner was spreading, feeding on crates of dry goods and rope. The smoke was getting thicker. They had minutes at most before this entire structure became an inferno. The guards outside couldn't storm the building without risking the hostages. Harding knew that. He had created the perfect trap. The only way out was through negotiation or sacrifice. What do you want? Damien asked. Specifically, not revenge or justice or any abstract concept. What actual outcome would satisfy you? Harding stared at him like the question was incomprehensible. I want you to suffer the way I've suffered, to lose everything and have everyone watch and know that you deserved it. I've already lost everything, Damien said, and everyone already watched. That happened 3 years ago. Vivienne took my empire. Seraphine abandoned me. London society treats me like a ghost. I have nothing left except a title and a manor I can barely afford to maintain. Then I'll take those too. Go ahead. The words came out before Damien could stop them, but once they were spoken, he realized they were true. Take the title, take the manor, take whatever pieces are left. None of it matters anymore. Liar. Harding's voice cracked. You're just saying that to manipulate me. I'm saying it because it's true. Damien spread his arms, making himself vulnerable. I spent my entire life believing that power and wealth and position were what made me worth something, that without them, I was nothing. And I was right. I am nothing, but I'm still alive, still standing here, still capable of making choices. And that's more than I had when I thought I had everything. The smoke was getting worse. One of the children in the hostage group was coughing violently. Damien could see Vivian calculating distances, looking for any opportunity to get the hostages out. But there was no clear path. Harding had positioned himself perfectly. This is very moving, Harding said. The broken Duke accepts his fate. But you're missing the point. I don't want your acceptance. I want your destruction. And hers. He turned the pistol back toward Vivian. "Then shoot me first," Damien said. Both Harding and Vivian looked at him in shock. Damien stepped between the pistol and Vivian before his rational mind could talk him out of it. "You want me destroyed. Here I am. Pull the trigger. Let these people go and kill me. That's revenge. That's consequences. That's me paying the price for every mistake I made." "Damien," Vivian said quietly. "Don't." He ignored her, keeping his eyes locked on Harding. "You said it yourself. I'm the one who created this mess. I'm the one who married her and treated her like garbage. I'm the one who was too arrogant to see you were stealing from me. Everything that happened started with my choices, so end it with me." Harding's hand was shaking badly now. "You think I won't do it?" "I think you will." Damien's voice was calm. "I think you're hurt and angry and desperate enough to pull that trigger. And maybe that's what I deserve. But these people don't deserve to burn. Vivian doesn't deserve to die for building something from nothing. So if you need blood to feel satisfied, take mine." The warehouse was silent, except for the crackling of flames and the quiet sobbing of the hostages. Damien could feel his heart hammering against his ribs, could taste copper fear in the back of his throat. Every survival instinct he possessed was screaming that he had made a terrible mistake, that he was about to die in a burning warehouse for people who meant nothing to him personally. But underneath the fear was something else, something that felt almost like peace. If he died here, at least he would die doing something that mattered, protecting people instead of using them, standing between danger and the innocent instead of sending others to take risks while he stayed safe. It wouldn't redeem him, wouldn't erase the years of damage, but it would mean something. That was more than most of his life had meant. Harding's finger tightened on the trigger. "Wait," Vivian said. Her voice cut through the tension like a blade. "If you're going to kill him, you should know the truth first." "What truth?" Harding spat. "The truth about why I destroyed you." Vivian moved to stand beside Damien, and he wanted to push her back, but she gave him a look that froze the impulse. "You think it was business, strategy, cold calculation. But it wasn't. Then what was it?" Vivian took a breath, and when she spoke, her voice carried a weight Damien had never heard before. It was love. The word hung in the air like a confession. "I loved Damien," Vivian continued, "completely, stupidly, with everything I had. And when he threw that away like it was worthless, something inside me broke so badly I didn't think it would ever heal." She looked at Damien, and he saw tears gathering in her eyes. "So I built an empire out of rage and hurt, and the desperate need to prove that I was worth something even if he couldn't see it. Every business decision I made was about showing him what he lost. Every success was meant to hurt him. I didn't destroy you for business, Christopher. I destroyed you because you helped him not see me." Harding lowered the pistol slightly. "That's insane." "It was insane," Vivian agreed. "It was obsessive and unhealthy, and it consumed 3 years of my life. But it was also the only thing that kept me alive when I wanted to disappear completely." She turned back to Harding. "So if you want to blame someone for your destruction, blame me." Damien was just the excuse. "You were the collateral damage in a revenge plot that had nothing to do with business, and everything to do with a woman who couldn't let go." Damien stared at her, his mind reeling. Everything she had said about moving past him, about feeling nothing, about him being irrelevant to her life. It had all been armor. Walls built so high she could pretend she didn't care when the truth was she had cared so much it had nearly destroyed her, and she had just torn down every wall to save him. "You're lying," Harding said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I wish I was," Vivian replied. "It would be easier to live with. But the truth is that I let my pain turn into a weapon, and I hurt everyone in range, including innocent people who didn't deserve it, including you." The fire was spreading faster now. The heat was becoming unbearable. One of the support beams groaned ominously. "Let them go, Christopher," Vivian said softly. "Let the hostages go. Keep us if you want. Kill us both if that's what you need. But let the innocent people leave first." Harding looked at the hostages, at the spreading fire, at Damien and Vivian standing together facing death. And something in his expression cracked. "I wanted to matter," he said quietly. "I wanted to be important, to build something that would outlast me. And instead, I'm going to be remembered as the man who burned down a warehouse full of workers because he couldn't handle losing." "You can change that," Damien said. "Right now. Let them go, and you become the man who chose mercy over revenge. That's legacy. Or I become the man who was too weak to finish what he started. Strength isn't finishing what you started when it's wrong, Vivian said. Strength is having the courage to stop. For a long moment, Harding stood frozen. Then, slowly, he lowered the pistol completely. Get them out, he said to Damien, before the whole building collapses. Damien didn't wait for him to change his mind. He rushed to the hostages and started cutting ropes with a knife he found on a nearby crate. Vivian joined him, working frantically. The hostages scrambled to their feet, coughing and crying, and Damien pointed them toward the door. Go! Run! Don't stop until you're outside the perimeter. They fled, a chaotic stream of humanity pouring through the smoke toward safety. Damien counted them as they passed. 43 went in. 43 had to come out. The last child disappeared through the door, and Damien felt something in his chest unclench. They were safe. A beam crashed down 10 feet away, sending up a shower of sparks. The ceiling was starting to collapse. They had seconds left. We need to go! Vivian shouted over the roar of flames. Damien looked back at Harding. The man still stood on the crates, holding the pistol loosely at his side. He wasn't moving toward the exit. Christopher, Damien called. Come on! Harding smiled sadly. This is where I belong, in the ashes of what I destroyed. You don't have to die here. Yes, I do. Harding's voice was calm now, accepting. Because you were right, Duke, about everything. I was a thief and a manipulator, and I destroyed myself long before you or Lady Ashford ever touched me. This is just the ending I earned. Another beam fell, closer this time. The heat was scorching. Damien, Vivian grabbed his arm. We can't save him if he doesn't want to be saved. We have to go now. She was right. The warehouse was collapsing. They would all die if they stayed. But the idea of leaving anyone behind, even a man who had tried to kill them, felt wrong in a way Damien couldn't articulate. I'm sorry, Damien shouted to Harding, for all of it, for not seeing what you were doing, for pushing you to this. Harding raised the pistol in a mock salute. Be better than I was, Duke. That's all the apology I need. Then he disappeared into the smoke as the ceiling came down. Vivian pulled Damien toward the exit, and they ran. Fire chased them through the doorway. They burst out into the night air and kept running until they were past the guards and the crowd and the danger. Only then did they stop, collapsing onto the dockboards and gasping for breath. Behind them, the warehouse collapsed completely in a shower of sparks and flame. Harding was gone. The guards rushed forward with questions and medical attention, but Damien barely heard them. He sat on the dockboards watching the fire burn and feeling hollow. Harding had chosen his own end, but that didn't make it easier to witness. The man had been broken by the same systems and choices that had broken Damien. The only difference was that Damien had gotten a chance to survive his destruction. Harding hadn't wanted that chance. Or maybe he had wanted it but didn't believe he deserved it. Damien understood that feeling intimately. Are you hurt? Vivian asked. She was covered in soot and ash, her expensive gown ruined, her carefully styled hair falling loose around her shoulders. She looked more human than he had ever seen her. No, Damien said. You. I'm fine. They sat in silence, watching the flames until the fire brigade arrived and began fighting the blaze. The other two warehouses were saved. The hostages were being treated by physicians and reunited with families. No one had died except the man who had orchestrated it all. It could have been worse. It should have been worse. But somehow they had all survived. Why did you tell him? Damien asked finally. About the revenge. About it being personal. Vivian stared at the fire. Because it was true. And because we were about to die, and I didn't want to die with that lie between us. You said you felt nothing for me. I lied. She turned to look at him, and the vulnerability in her expression made his chest ache. I've been lying about that for 3 years because it was easier than admitting that I'm still angry at you, still hurt, still haunted by the woman I was before you broke her. I'm sorry. I know. Vivian's smile was sad. You've said it 100 different ways, but sorry doesn't fix what's broken, Damien. It just acknowledges the damage. Then what does fix it? Time, distance, building a life where the past doesn't define every choice. She stood slowly, brushing ash from her dress. I don't know if we'll ever be fixed, either of us, but maybe that's okay. Maybe some things are supposed to stay broken as a reminder of what we survived. Damien stood too, his legs unsteady. So what happens now? Vivienne looked at him, and he could see her rebuilding the walls in real time. The vulnerability disappearing, the armor sliding back into place. Now we go back to our separate lives. You rebuild what you can. I continue what I've started. We exist in the same city without destroying each other. That's it. After everything. What did you expect? A reconciliation, a second chance. She shook her head. We're not those people anymore, Damien. The Duke and the Duchess who got married are dead. We're just the survivors wearing their names. The words hit harder than they should have because they were true. Whatever chance they might have had died the night he walked away from her kneeling in the rain. You could build 1,000 empires, and he could learn 1,000 lessons, and it wouldn't change the fundamental fact that some damage was permanent. But maybe that was the real lesson. Not that people could be redeemed or relationships could be salvaged, but that you could survive the unsurvivable and keep going anyway. Can I ask you something? Damien said. One question. Then I'm leaving. When you built your empire, when you destroyed me piece by piece, did any part of you hope that I would wake up and fight for you? That I would see what I lost and try to win you back? Vivienne was silent for a long moment. Then, yes. For about 6 months, I hoped that. Hoped you would show up and beg and prove that I had mattered even a little bit. But you never came. Never tried. So I stopped hoping and started building instead. I'm here now, 3 years too late, Damien. You're here because circumstances forced you to be. Not because you chose it. She was right. Again. She was always right. And it was infuriating and humbling in equal measure. I would choose it now, he said. If I could go back, I would choose you. But you can't go back. Vivienne's voice was gentle but final. None of us can. We only move forward. She started to walk away, and Damien felt panic claw up his throat. Wait. She stopped but didn't turn around. Can we at least be friends? Allies. Something other than strangers who traumatized each other. Vivienne looked back over her shoulder, and her smile was genuinely sad. Ask me again in 5 years, if we're both still standing, if we've both built lives that don't revolve around the damage we did to each other. Maybe then we can try. And if I want more than friendship in 5 years, then you'll have learned nothing. She turned away again. Goodbye, Damien. This time, he let her go. He watched her walk through the crowd of guards and officials and disappear into a carriage that would take her back to her empire and her carefully constructed life. The life she had built specifically to exist without him. And he understood, finally and completely, that she was gone. Not dead, not destroyed. Just beyond his reach in a way that all his money and power and desperate wanting would never change. The greatest punishment wasn't losing everything. It was understanding exactly what you lost and knowing you could never get it back. Damien stood on the dock as the fire burned down to embers and asked himself the only question that mattered: what now? 6 months later, Damien opened a small legal practice in a part of London he had never bothered to visit when he was powerful. It wasn't glamorous. The office was 3 cramped rooms above a bakery. His clients were mostly common people with common problems: contract disputes, property issues, workers who had been cheated by employers. The kind of people the old Damien would never have noticed. But he noticed them now, listened to their problems, used what remained of his legal training and business knowledge to help them navigate systems designed to keep them powerless. The work was hard, and the pay was minimal, and every day reminded him of how far he had fallen. It also gave him something he hadn't had in years: purpose. He wasn't a duke anymore. Wasn't a shipping magnate or a feared businessman or anything the old world would recognize as important. He was just a man with skills trying to use them for something other than his own advancement. It felt honest. It felt clean. It felt like the first real thing he had done since watching Vivienne walk away from him 3 years ago. The city kept turning. London society moved on to new scandals and new figures to worship or destroy. Damien's name came up occasionally in conversations about fallen aristocrats, but mostly he was forgotten, irrelevant, a cautionary tale that people told at dinner parties before moving on to more interesting gossip. He was nobody, and slowly, painfully, he learned to be okay with that. One afternoon, almost a year after the warehouse fire, Damien was working through a particularly tedious property case when his clerk announced a visitor, a woman. Wouldn't give her name. Damien looked up from his papers to find Vivian standing in his doorway. She looked different than the last time he'd seen her, less armored. She wore a simple dress instead of one of her statement gowns, and her hair was pulled back casually instead of styled within an inch of its life. She looked like a person instead of a monument. "Lady Ashford," Damien said, standing. "This is unexpected. I was in the neighborhood." Vivian glanced around the small office, taking in the worn furniture and stacked files. "This is what you're doing now. Helping people who can't afford better representation. It's not glamorous. No. But it's good." They stood in awkward silence, and Damien realized he had no idea what to say to her. Small talk felt absurd. Apologies had already been exhausted. There was no script for this kind of encounter. "Why are you here?" he asked finally. Vivian moved to the window overlooking the street. "I've been thinking about what you said, about choosing differently if you could go back. I meant it. I know." She turned to face him. "But that's not how life works. We don't get to go back. We only get to choose what we do next. So I wanted to see what you chose. And you chose to help people who can't fight for themselves, to use the skills you developed building an empire to protect people who have nothing." She smiled slightly. "It's the first time I've seen you do something that wasn't about ego or power or proving you mattered. I'm not trying to prove anything anymore." Damien leaned against his desk. "I'm just trying to be useful. That's growth. Maybe. Or maybe I just finally ran out of other options. Does it matter which one it is?" The question hung between them, and Damien realized it didn't. However he had gotten here, through genuine change or exhausted surrender, the result was the same. He was doing work that helped people, making choices based on what was right instead of what benefited him, living smaller but more honestly. "No," he said. "I don't think it matters." Vivian nodded slowly. "I'm opening a new foundation, providing legal representation for women trapped in abusive marriages. Women who want to leave but don't have the resources or the knowledge to do it safely. That's incredible. I need lawyers, people who understand how the system works, how to protect vulnerable clients from powerful men who want to control them." She met his eyes. "I thought you might be interested." Damien felt his heart kick. "You want me to work for you. I want you to work with me. There's a difference." She pulled a card from her bag and set it on his desk. "That's the foundation's office. If you're interested, come by tomorrow. We can discuss terms." "Vivian." She held up a hand. "I'm not offering this because I've forgiven you. I'm offering it because you've proven you can do the work without making it about yourself. And because those women deserve the best representation they can get. And you're good at what you do, even if you spent years using that skill for terrible purposes." It was the most backhanded job offer he had ever received. It was also probably the most honest. "I'll think about it," Damien said. "Don't think too long. We start taking clients next month." Vivian moved toward the door, then paused. "And Damien, this isn't a second chance. It's not a path to reconciliation. It's just work. Meaningful work, but work." "I understand." She nodded and left. Damien sat alone in his office holding her card and feeling something shift in his chest. This wasn't redemption, wasn't forgiveness, wasn't any of the grand emotional resolutions he had once hoped for. It was just an opportunity to do something that mattered alongside someone who understood exactly who he was and what he had done and was willing to let him help anyway. It was more than he deserved, and maybe that was the point. You didn't earn forgiveness or second chances. You just kept moving forward and did the next right thing and hoped that eventually the weight of your mistakes became something you could carry instead of something that crushed you. The next day, Damien went to the foundation's office. It was in a newly renovated building near the river, spacious and well-lit, and filled with people who looked like they believed in what they were doing. Vivian gave him a tour, introduced him to the other lawyers, explained the cases they were working on. He signed on immediately. The work was brutal. Every case was a reminder of the kind of man he had been. Women trapped in marriages with men who treated them as property, who controlled their money and their movements and their very existence. Men who looked terrifyingly like the Duke Damien used to be. He threw himself into the cases with something approaching desperation, working 18-hour days, taking on the most difficult clients, fighting battles in courtrooms and drawing rooms and anywhere else powerful men tried to maintain their stranglehold on women's lives. And slowly, case by case, he felt the weight on his chest begin to shift. He couldn't undo what he had done to Vivian, couldn't restore the years she had spent building herself back up from the woman he had broken. But he could make sure other women didn't have to face the same battles alone. It wasn't redemption, but it was something. 2 years after joining the foundation, Damien won a case that made headlines across London. A duchess trapped in a marriage to a duke who had isolated her from her family and controlled every aspect of her life. The case was high profile and difficult, and every newspaper in the city covered the trial. When the judge ruled in the duchess's favor, granting her divorce, her freedom, and control of her own inheritance, the courtroom erupted in applause. Damien felt nothing but exhaustion. He walked out of the courthouse to find Vivian waiting on the steps. She had attended some of the trial, but stayed in the background, letting him handle the case. Now she fell into step beside him as he walked toward the carriage. "That was good work," she said. "It was necessary work." They walked in silence for a moment, and Damien noticed how comfortable the silence had become. 2 years of working together had worn away the sharpest edges of their history. They would never be what they once were, but they had become something else. Colleagues, allies in a fight that mattered more than their personal damage. "I'm proud of you," Vivian said suddenly. Damien stopped walking. "You've never said that before." "I've never meant it before." She looked at him, and he saw something in her eyes that might have been respect. "You could have taken that win and used it to rebuild your reputation, turned yourself into the hero duke who saves abused women. But you didn't. You kept your head down and did the work. Because the work matters more than the recognition." "Yes," Vivian smiled. "That's why I'm proud." They started walking again, and Damien felt something warm settle in his chest. It wasn't love. Wasn't romance or reconciliation or any of the things he had once desperately wanted. It was something quieter and maybe more valuable. Mutual respect between two people who had destroyed each other and then chosen to build something better from the ruins. 5 years after the warehouse fire, Vivian's foundation had grown into the most influential women's rights organization in England. They had won hundreds of cases, changed laws, shifted public opinion about women's right to leave abusive marriages and control their own lives. Damien had become one of the foundation's senior attorneys, known for his tenacity in court and his willingness to take on the most powerful opponents. He was respected again. But it was different from the old kind of respect. This wasn't based on fear or wealth or social position. It was earned through work and results and standing up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. It felt real. One evening, Damien was working late in the foundation offices when Vivian knocked on his door. She held 2 glasses of wine and looked unusually nervous. "Can I come in?" she asked. "Of course." She entered and handed him a glass, then sat across from his desk. "We need to talk." Damien's stomach dropped. Those words never preceded good conversations. "About what?" "About us." Vivian took a sip of wine. "It's been 5 years since I told you to ask me again about being friends, since I said maybe we could try if we were both still standing." "I remember." "We're both still standing." Damien set down his glass carefully. "We are. So I'm saying we can try." Vivian's voice was careful. "Friends. Not what we were. Not anything romantic. Just 2 people who went through hell together and came out the other side and want to see if there's anything salvageable." Damien felt tears prick his eyes and forced them back. "I would like that. There are rules." She held up a hand. "We don't talk about the marriage unless necessary. We don't relitigate the past. We don't use each other's history as weapons when we disagree. We're just 2 people who work together and occasionally have dinner like normal humans. I can live with that. And if either of us starts falling back into old patterns, me using work as armor, you using charm as manipulation, the other one calls it out immediately." "Agreed." Vivian raised her glass. "To friendship built on scar tissue and mutual damage." Damien raised his glass and they drank, and something fundamental shifted. The weight he had been carrying for 7 years didn't disappear, but it became bearable, manageable, the kind of burden you could live with instead of one that crushed you. They started having dinner once a week, talking about cases and politics and everything except their shared history. Slowly, carefully, they rebuilt something that looked like friendship. It was fragile and imperfect and required constant maintenance, but it was real. And for the first time since he had walked away from her in the rain, Damien felt like he was actually moving forward instead of just surviving. 10 years after Vivienne had left him, Damien attended the opening of her latest project, a school for women, not just teaching traditional subjects, but business and law and finance. Everything women needed to build independent lives. It was revolutionary. It was exactly the kind of thing Vivienne would create. Damien watched her give the opening speech to a crowd of supporters and dignitaries and felt something complicated twist in his chest. Pride in what she had built, grief for what they had lost, gratitude that they had found a way to coexist without destroying each other again. After the ceremony, they walked through the school's empty halls, their footsteps echoing. "This is incredible," Damien said. "You're changing the world. I'm trying to make sure other women don't have to rebuild themselves from nothing the way I did." Vivienne stopped at a window overlooking the gardens. "That's all. It's more than all. It's everything." She turned to look at him, and in the fading light he could see the woman she had become, strong and accomplished and whole in a way she had never been when they were married. The brokenness was still there. You could see it in the careful way she maintained boundaries, in the walls that never quite came down. But she had built a life that didn't require him or anyone else to validate her existence. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had stayed?" Damien asked. "If I had turned around that night instead of walking away, every day for the first 2 years?" Vivienne's voice was quiet. "Then I stopped wondering because it didn't matter. You didn't stay, and I wouldn't be who I am now if you had. Do you regret who you've become?" "No." She smiled. "I'm proud of who I've become. I just wish I hadn't needed to be destroyed first to get here. I'm sorry I was the one who destroyed you. I know. And I'm sorry I spent 3 years destroying you back." They stood in silence, and Damien realized this was as close to peace as they were ever going to get. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation. Just two people acknowledging the damage and choosing not to inflict more. "Can I tell you something?" Vivienne said. "Anything. When you walked into that warehouse knowing Harding might kill you, when you put yourself between him and me, that was the first time I believed you had actually changed." "Why?" "Because the old Damien would have let someone else take that risk, would have calculated the odds and chosen self-preservation." She met his eyes. "You chose differently, not because you hoped it would win me back, but because it was right. It was the least I could do after everything I took from you. You didn't take anything, Damien. You just failed to see what you had until it was gone. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes. One is malicious, the other is just human." They walked back to the entrance together, and Damien felt something settle that had been unsettled for a decade. He would never have what they once had, would never be able to undo the choices that destroyed their marriage. But he had something else now, something harder won and more valuable. He had become someone who could look at his worst mistakes and not drown in them. Someone who could use his skills for something other than ego and acquisition. Someone who could stand beside the woman he had broken and help her build something beautiful without needing to own it. That was growth. That was redemption. Not the kind that erased the past, but the kind that allowed you to live with it. As they parted ways in front of the school, Vivienne touched his arm gently. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For becoming someone I can respect. It makes the history easier to carry." She left, and Damien stood alone watching the sun set over London. Somewhere in this city, women were filing into shelters the foundation had built. Lawyers he had trained were preparing cases. Lives were changing because he and Vivienne had chosen to transform their mutual destruction into something useful. It wasn't the life he had imagined when he was a powerful duke who thought love was weakness and sentiment was wasteful. It was better. Because it was real. Because it mattered. Because when he looked in the mirror now, he saw someone who had faced his own cruelty and chosen to become different. The man who had walked away from his wife kneeling in the rain was dead. And the man who remained was still learning how to live with what that death had cost. Still working to deserve the second chance he had been given. Still trying to build something worth more than the empire he had lost. Still standing, still fighting, still moving forward through a world that didn't forgive easily, but sometimes, if you worked hard enough and became honest enough and stopped demanding forgiveness as a right, allowed you to earn something close to peace. Damien walked home through streets he had once owned and now just inhabited, carrying the weight of his history and the strange, fragile hope of his future. And for the first time in a decade, he felt like he might actually deserve both.